A world without a Dark Lord. The chamber is open and full of whispers, not the shrieks of battle we remember, not the echo of a boy's defiance against a faceless Dark Lord, but the slow, patient drip of water onto ancient stone as three figures stand beneath the carved, serpentine face of Salazar Slytherin and simply breathe. On one side of the slick green floor, Harry and Hermione stand shoulder to shoulder, wands loose, but ready, robes damp with the chill that always lives this far beneath Hogwarts. On the other, framed by coiling stone serpents and the hollow eyes of the statue, stands Tom Riddle. Not a diary shade, not a red-eyed monster, but a man in his late 30s, robes ink dark, expression tired rather than cruel, the faintest tremor of uncertainty in the hand that is not holding his wand. The air tastes of old magic and damp rock. Water slides in thin threads down the pillars, catching torchlight in brief, wavering flashes. Somewhere in the dark, something scaly shifts, and a low, restless hiss curls through the chamber. Parseltongue. But this time, the language of serpents is not a prelude to murder, it is a negotiation, a command for calm, as Tom lowers his gaze and the unseen basilisk stills. What if this was our chamber of secrets? What if instead of a teenage memory trying to rip itself free of a diary, we met an older Tom Riddle who never fractured his soul, never carved it into Horcruxes, never became the Dark Lord whose name could freeze a room? What if the brilliant Slytherin prefect, the orphan who once stole trinkets just to feel in control, had been caught, challenged, guided before obsession hardened into ideology? In this world, there is no prophecy etched over a child's crib, no boy who lived, no Halloween in Godric's Hollow lit by green light. Lily and James Potter are alive somewhere above, arguing with the Ministry about aura reforms, not lying in a graveyard. Harry is not a legend. He is a student who found the entrance to a forbidden chamber with the girl who has always stood at his side. This isn't a story about erasing canon so much as tilting it just a few degrees to see something more profound. We're exploring a Hogwarts where Tom Riddle grew into a controversial scholar of dark magic containment, not its most infamous practitioner, where Dumbledore chose mentorship and relentless oversight instead of distant suspicion, where the chamber remained a secret research site, not a weapon, and in that shadowed space, under the weight of 1,000 stone scales, Harry and Hermione's bond shifts. Without a Dark Lord to define them, there is no chosen one, and his clever friend, only two minds drawn together by questions that no one else wants to ask about the man in front of them. When Tom's voice cracks on a quiet, "You shouldn't have come down here alone," Harry instinctively steps half a pace in front of Hermione, his free hand brushing back to find hers. Their fingers catch, interlace, just for a moment. Her thumb presses into his knuckle, steadying him, steadying herself, and Tom Riddle watches that small, blazing connection with an expression that is almost envy, almost recognition, because this is a story about how love, guidance, and choice reshape an era, and how, in a world without a Dark Lord, the most dangerous magic in this chamber might be the way two people choose to stand together. So how did we get here, to a dripping cavern, where history itself has been rewritten by different choices? Rewriting destiny, the core, what if, and why it matters. We get here by tilting one axis. Not burning the cannon down, but turning the wheel a single, precise degree at the exact moment Tom Riddle's future hardens into fate. This isn't a story about pretending Voldemort was never real in the books we love. It's about asking what if the same boy from Wool's orphanage, with the same hunger, the same brilliance, meets a world that actually answers him differently. We're exploring a thought experiment, not an erasure. Keep the orphanage, keep the cold London rain, keep Dumbledore's wary first visit, and change what happens after the warning. So here is the core shift. In canon, Tom's trajectory is a slow, elegant dive into darkness. Model student, perfect prefect, head boy, all while opening the Chamber of Secrets, framing Hagrid, charming Slughorn into revealing the secret of Horcruxes. In this version, that descent is interrupted before the soul splitting, before the mask of Lord Voldemort ever forms. He still becomes influential, still polarizing, but he remains Tom Riddle, a controversial reformer inside the system, not a mythic terror outside it. Imagine Dumbledore, having seen the diary incident and the basilisk, deciding that suspicion isn't enough. He mentors Tom more directly, pairs watchfulness with real, inconvenient care. Slughorn, instead of basking in the glow of his star pupil, is quietly pressed to set boundaries. No casual talk of immortality, no flattery around forbidden magic. Tom is still tempted, still furious at his muggle father, still obsessed with control, but when he reaches for Horcruxes, someone is actually there to pull his hand back, and once that happens, everything else trembles. No Dark Lord means no prophecy. Lily and James live in Godric's Hollow, not as martyrs, but as young parents who get to be tired and happy and ordinary. Harry grows up without a scar, without the title The Boy Who Lived, without the constant hum of being a symbol instead of a person. Hermione arrives at a Hogwarts scarred by past prejudice, but not an active war zone, her brilliance unfolding in classrooms and libraries rather than battlefields. Their connection has room to breathe, to argue, to misread, to circle closer, because love is not a desperate reaction to trauma, but something more profound that grows in the quiet moments between. Most importantly, one boy's redirected fall becomes the hinge of a generation. This is a story about the power of early love and mentorship, about the difference between controlling pain and healing it, about how one person's redemption or corruption reshapes everyone else's path. If Tom Riddle is not a monster in the shadows, but a flawed, magnetic figure in the public eye, admired, feared, debated, what does that do to ministry politics? To blood purity ideology, to the way Harry and Hermione learn what is worth fighting for? Through all of this, we'll examine canon facts like anchors, Wool's orphanage, Dumbledore's suspicions, Slughorn's influence, the Chamber's history. The world stays recognizably Rowling's, but reconfigured around romance and character rather than prophecy and terror. So if Voldemort never rises, what new danger, what new love story takes his place at the center of history? Thesis and roadmap: from orphanage shadows to a different war. So if Voldemort never rises, what new danger, what new love story takes his place at the center of history? What if the most feared dark wizard in canon simply never exists, not because he was destroyed, but because he was redirected before he could be born as a monster? Our thesis is simple and uncomfortable. If Tom Riddle is met at a few precise pressure points, with consistent, intentional care and firm boundaries, he does not become Lord Voldemort. The orphanage boy who hoards possessions and fears abandonment still exists. The brilliant Slytherin who craves control still exists. This isn't a story about magically fixing a broken child with one hug and a lemon drop. This is a story about what changes when the adults around him refuse to look away, and when connection is offered early enough that he can't quite convince himself he doesn't need it. We're exploring that through 4 main axes. First, Tom's altered childhood and Hogwarts years. Wool's orphanage is still cold, still bleak, but a matron who actually notices his nightmares, a Dumbledore who visits more than once, a Slughorn who praises but also questions. These moments bend the line. The Chamber of Secrets still whispers to him, but what if he isn't alone when it does? What if a professor catches the pattern of missing pets, or a classmate becomes the first person Tom hesitates to sacrifice? Second, Dumbledore's role changes. Instead of distant suspicion, we'll examine what happens when he chooses engaged mentorship, supervised research instead of secret experiments, explicit conversations about Horcrux theory instead of half-heard rumors, consequences that are real but not purely punitive. Without a Dark Lord rising, there is no prophecy, no boy who lived. Lily and James Potter survive, not as saints frozen in martyrdom, but as flawed, loving parents raising a very real child. That leads to our third axis: Harry and Hermione in a world without an open war. Harry grows up with photographs that move, and parents who argue over bedtime, not with a cupboard and a scar that defines him. Hermione still boards the Hogwarts Express, still clutching a list of spells she's memorized, but the boy she meets is not a symbol. He's a boy whose parents are alive, whose fame is quieter, whose greatest danger might be the secrets his headmaster and a reformed Tom Riddle are trying to contain. Narratively, we'll move era by era: Tom's youth, his Hogwarts ascent, his post-graduation career, the Marauder's time, Harry's years, braiding cinematic vignettes with close analysis. One moment, you're in the orphanage corridor, watching young Tom decide whether to hurt or to spare. The next, we're pausing together to ask what that choice reveals about nature, nurture, and something more profound than either. Most importantly, this world is not suddenly kind. Love, romantic, platonic, parental, remains risky, demanding, often unreciprocated. Tom becomes a feared but brilliant academic rather than a warlord, but his lectures on soul magic still chill his students. Lily and James raise Harry, but nearly lose their marriage over the secrets they're asked to keep. Hermione and Harry's bond still deepens into something worth fighting for, yet now their final confrontation is less battlefield apocalypse and more courtroom drama, testimonies, pensive memories, a reckoning with a man who might have been a monster and chose, imperfectly, not to be. And as we trace that path, era by era, we'll always return to the same question. If the world is spared Voldemort, what hidden darkness does it still have to face, especially when that darkness looks almost human? Love as counter-magic, the emotional frame of this timeline. If Voldemort never rises, what fills the empty space where terror used to live? In this timeline, the answer is quieter, stranger, and most importantly, more intimate. Love as a kind of counter-magic that doesn't explode in green light, but seeps, slowly, into the cracks where monstrosity would have taken root. We have to distinguish two kinds of love. There's the comfortable, canon-typical love that keeps the world turning. Lily and James sharing tea over baby toys, Arthur and Molly arguing about plugs, McGonagall marking essays late into the night for students who will never thank her. That love maintains the status quo. It blesses what already is. And then there's something more profound, the fiercer, riskier love that asks, almost demands, that people change. This is the love that looks at Tom Riddle and says, "You do not have to be what your past decided." Dumbledore in the orphanage is our first pivot. Canon gives us a wary professor, already half afraid of the boy in front of him. Here, we're exploring a Dumbledore who still sees the danger, but chooses a different response. He doesn't just warn Tom about stealing, he returns. Term after term. He writes letters over the summers. He invites Tom to sit in his office, to argue about magical ethics over tea instead of in secret corridors. Love, in this world, is not a single grand speech. It's office hours attended and attended again. Watch how the motif repeats. Lily bends over a crib in Godric's Hollow, not to die for Harry, but to live with him. She smooths his hair after a nightmare, humming a muggle lullaby that James pretends not to know the words to. Years later, Hermione's hand rests on Harry's arm in the library, not after a troll or a basilisk, but in that ordinary moment when he's overwhelmed by an essay and a life that feels too big. No prophecy, no Dark Lord. Just an anxious boy, a brilliant girl, and a choice to stay at the table together for one more chapter. This isn't a story about easy redemption. Tom is still chaos. He still craves power, still feels that cold distance from other children at Wool's orphanage. But now that chaos is contained by unexpected anchors, a stern mentor who actually shows up, a classmate who challenges his ideas instead of worshipping them, perhaps even a fragile romance that forces him to see another person as real, inconvenient, and precious. Love here is not, "I save you once in a blaze of glory." It is, "I answer your letter when you're insufferable. I visit when you're in St. Mungo's. I refuse to let you vanish into theory and ideology." Harry and Hermione echo that pattern. Without a Dark Lord to force alliances, their bond has to be chosen, not imposed. When courage meets brilliance in a world without open war, what do they fight? They fight apathy. They fight the slow creep of prejudice in ministry memos, the casual cruelty of jokes about Muggleborns that never quite died. They learn to choose each other in the mundane spaces, study sessions, quiet walks around the lake, the decision to sit together at family dinners, where James still flinches at the name Riddle. So the emotional expectation of this timeline is clear. This is a story about people trying, failing, and trying again to reach one another before fear hardens into ideology. There will be missteps. There will be nights when Tom does not open Dumbledore's letter, when Harry snaps at Hermione and walks away, when Hermione wonders if she's asking too much of everyone. But the magic we're examining here is the decision to come back, to knock on the office door one more time, to say, "I'm still here," when it would be easier to retreat into safety. And that raises the next question. If love is the counter-magic that prevents Voldemort, what new conflicts emerge when that same love starts pushing against the structures of the wizarding world itself? From theory to story, inviting you into the alternate timeline. So let's step through that door together. Up to now, we've been naming principles. Love as counter-magic, connection as resistance, survival versus actually living. but a theory is only as powerful as the life you pour it into. So what if, instead of starting with Harry under the stairs or Hermione on the Hogwarts Express, we begin with a boy in a gray building on a gray London street? Decades before either of them are born, this is where we cross the veil of canon, not to reject it, but to walk alongside it, half a step to the left, in a world that looks almost the same and feels completely different. The names are familiar, the dates line up, the war we know is still out there as a possibility, but the emotional order of events is about to be rewritten. We'll examine that rewrite in chapters, and the first one has a title: The First Intervention, Wool's Orphanage. In canon, Wool's is a backdrop. A few sepia memories in a pensive, a cold matron, a boy already using magic to hurt and to hoard, already convinced that power is the only thing that keeps you safe. It's a place Tom survives, not a place he lives. In this timeline, that orphanage becomes the fulcrum, the catalyst, the moment where everything that might have become Voldemort is nudged just slightly in another direction. Because this isn't a story about redeeming a monster with one grand gesture. This is a story about what happens when, years before Dumbledore ever appears in that cramped office, someone else notices the pattern of missing toys and frightened children and doesn't respond with fear or punishment alone. Someone who sees the same sharpness, the same hunger, and chooses to answer it with boundaries and presence, with the terrifying patience of staying. From the outside, nothing spectacular changes. Tom Riddle still grows up in a Muggle orphanage. He is still brilliant, still strange, still the boy who can talk to snakes and make bullies pay, but we're exploring the difference between being watched and being known, between being managed and being met. Survival has always been his default. In this version, the question becomes whether he can be taught, slowly and imperfectly, to live, and those lessons won't stop with him. Every small shift here ripples outward, to a wizarding world that never crowns a Dark Lord, to a James and Lily who live long enough to argue over bedtime, to a Harry who isn't the boy who lived, but simply a boy who meets a girl on the train and feels an extraordinary connection without a prophecy pressing on their every breath. Most importantly, Tom becomes the first test case for the choice Harry and Hermione will later face in a quieter but no less demanding world. Do you build your life around not dying, or around something more profound, something worth fighting for, even when no one is forcing your hand? And when we walk back into that dim orphanage office, when the door opens on the boy and the adult who will change him, it will not be Dumbledore standing there. It will be someone else entirely. Wool's Orphanage, rewritten, the first hand that reaches Tom. The office door opens on a world that smells of boiled cabbage and bleach. Wool's Orphanage is not evil, it is simply tired. The corridors are lined with chipped green paint, the radiators hiss and clank like irritated ghosts, and the windows wear a permanent film of London soot that turns daylight into a gray, reluctant thing. Children's voices echo off stone, but not around Tom Riddle. Around him, there is always a little pocket of silence. We know this place from canon and fragments, and Dumbledore's memories. The thin mattress, the box of stolen trinkets, the boy who already delights in control. Here, we're exploring the same setting with the camera pushed in closer. We see the way the other children give Tom a wide berth in the dining hall, how a chair leg snaps under a bully who laughed at him, how a girl's beloved doll is found headless in the laundry, its porcelain face cracked in a pattern that looks almost like a smile. Nothing can be proven, nothing ever can, but everyone feels it. The lights that flicker when he is angry, the way doors jam shut when he is cornered. Small, cruel uses of magic, deployed not for survival, but for dominance. In canon, the adult who walks into that office is Dumbledore, already wary. Here, what if the first hand that truly reaches for Tom belongs to someone else? A Muggle social worker assigned to Wool's, Ms. Eliza Hart, who has seen too many children fold in on themselves and refuses to add another name to that quiet list. Or perhaps, because this is still a wizarding story, a squib, officially listed as assistant matron, unofficially placed by an order sympathizer long before Voldemort is a name to fear. We'll examine the second option. Mrs. Hart is her Muggle alias. In Diagon Alley, once upon a time, she was Eliza Hopkirk. She cannot cast spells, but she can recognize the way magic hums under Tom's skin like a live wire. When a boy slips on a mysteriously wet patch of floor and breaks his wrist, when a cupboard refuses to open until Tom is finished with his book, Eliza does not look away. She looks at him. "Tom," she says one afternoon, when a bird lies dead on the windowsill outside his room, neck twisted cleanly. "You did this." He lies, of course. He always lies. His voice is silk over steel. No, miss. In canon, adults either fear him or fawn over him. This time, she does neither. You're very clever, she answers. And very angry. Those two together can make you extraordinary, or they can make you cruel. I won't let you be cruel while you live under my roof. It is the first boundary that is also, unmistakably, a claim. Tom tests it. He hides another child's only photograph, just to watch the boy cry. Eliza finds the picture under Tom's mattress and calls him into the office. The cabbage smell thick, the rain ticking against the glass. Why? She asks. He reaches for his usual weapons: contempt, manipulation, the cold certainty that adults are weak. In his head, the monologue is scathing. They are fools. They are always fools. Love is a lie people tell themselves, so they will not see how alone they are. Power is the only real protection, but under that, something else flickers. A terror of dependence so old, it feels like bone. If she sees him, truly sees him, won't she leave like everyone else has left? Isn't that what always happens when he shows what he can do? This isn't a story about blaming a child into goodness. The narrative of his life insists. This is a story about never needing anyone. Eliza refuses that script. You wanted to see if I'd give up on you, she says softly. I'm not going to. But you will apologize, and you will return what you took. He waits for the anger, the slap, the withdrawal. Instead, there is simply her hand, palm up, patient between them. Most importantly, she does not flinch from the darkness she's naming. She does not worship it either. She just stays. The room is so quiet, he can hear the radiator breathe. His mind races with calculations. How to use her, how to break her, how to never need her. Yet beneath the calculations, something more profound presses forward. The reluctant, bewildering desire to be chosen for more than his power. Tom stares at that offered hand for a beat too long. Then, almost against his own will, he takes it. And in that small, shaking moment, the future of the wizarding world shifts from inevitable isolation toward a fragile, contested connection, something worth fighting for if it can survive what comes next. Dumbledore's second chance, a different first meeting. Tom's fingers close around Dumbledore's hand, and for a heartbeat, the shabby orphanage office feels like a crossroads rather than a sentence. In canon, this is the moment Dumbledore walks in as investigator first, mentor second. A man already braced for the Dark Lord he suspects this boy might become. But what if, in this world, he walks in carrying not just reports of odd incidents, but letters from the one adult who has actually loved Tom? What if he arrives not only wary of a threat, but consciously prepared to meet a child in pain? We're exploring that altered stance now. Dumbledore sits, not behind the matron's desk, but in the rickety chair beside Tom's bed, transfigured with a lazy wave into something softer. He does not lead with a lecture about stealing, about cruelty, about how we are quite alike. Instead, he reaches into his cloak and places something small on the blanket between them. A worn, moving photograph of a Hogwarts feast, candles floating overhead, children laughing, a boy with auburn hair at the Gryffindor table looking almost startled by joy. That, Dumbledore says quietly, is me before I knew who I was. Before I knew what my power could do to the people I loved. This isn't a story about absolving Dumbledore of his canon failures. This is a story about what changes when the greatest wizard of his age refuses to hide his own scars. Tom's eyes flick from the photograph to the man. His performance, the polite, cold brilliance, the rehearsed superiority, wavers. No one has ever offered him a pass that is not a weapon. No one has ever suggested that extraordinary power and catastrophic mistakes can live together in one life without canceling each other out. He tests the moment like a weak floorboard. You hurt people? I did, Dumbledore answers, and there is no twinkle now, only regret. Out of arrogance, out of fear, out of love that became something more twisted. Magic gives us power, Tom. Hogwarts will teach you how to wield it, but it will also expect you to choose, again and again, what kind of man you wish to become. Here, Dumbledore does what he never quite does in canon. He names the stakes clearly. He tells Tom that Hogwarts is not just a sanctuary of power, but a place of responsibility, of oversight, of being known. He speaks of professors who will watch his progress, of a headmaster who will not look away from troubling patterns, of regular conversations, letters in the summer, tea in his office during term, where they will examine together what he is learning and why he is so drawn to certain corridors of magic. Tom bristles at the word oversight. He is used to neglect, not attention. Neglect he can dominate. Attention feels like chains. And yet, beneath the anger, there is something else. A bewildering, almost painful pull toward this promise of being seen, and not immediately condemned. Most importantly, Dumbledore names the fear Tom has never voiced. "You are not a monster," he says, as if stating a magical fact. "You are a boy who has been left alone with his power for too long. That ends now. We will face it together." When Dumbledore leaves Wool's orphanage that day, he does not simply apparate away and file a mental note. On the cracked pavement outside, he pauses, hand pressed to his chest, and makes a private vow. He will not abandon this child to history. He will track his friendships, his obsessions, his excursions into the restricted section. He will remember what neglect once did to his own sister and never let that pattern repeat. Because if Tom Riddle is a storm waiting to break, Dumbledore has finally chosen to stand in the rain with him. The question is, when the first real thunderclap comes, when the chamber, the diary, the whispers of immortality begin, will that fragile bond hold or shatter in a way that remakes the entire wizarding world? Pattern interrupt, a glimpse of Harry and Hermione in this softer future. Thunder threatens in one timeline, and then, without warning, we cut to sunlight. Glass rattles, not from a storm, but from the Hogwarts Express hissing on the platform. The scene snaps forward years in an instant, and we are no longer in Wool's orphanage with a lonely boy and a wary professor. We're at platform 9 3/4, where a red-haired woman, who should have died, is very much alive, standing on tiptoe, trying to flatten her son's impossible hair. "Harry, at least pretend to let me tidy you," Lily says, laughter in her voice, not fear. There is no lightning-shaped scar, no whispered title, no boy who lived, just a boy rolling his eyes and secretly leaning into his mother's touch for one more second before he has to be brave on his own. What if this is the world Tom Riddle, never becoming Voldemort, quietly created? A world where Lily Evans grew up arguing about ministry policy instead of hiding from Death Eaters, where she and James actually had time to be young parents, to argue about Quidditch teams and bedtime, not about Fidelius charms. Harry pulls away at last, cheeks pink, pretending not to notice how James is pretending not to be emotional in the background. And then, on the train, in a sunlit compartment that feels almost too peaceful for those of us raised on canon, he meets a girl with an overstuffed book bag and slightly ink-stained fingers. Hermione Granger in this timeline still has that restless intelligence, that need to understand everything, but there's an ease to her that wasn't there before. No parents nervously reading about a Dark Lord in the Muggle papers. No childhood filled with hushed conversations and half-truths. Magic, for her, has always been a wonder first, not a threat. She sits opposite Harry, pushes her hair behind her ear, and instead of grilling him about whether he's really Harry Potter, she hesitates, then offers a box of chocolate frogs. "I brought extra. I thought we could share?" It's such a small thing, but small things are where entire histories reveal themselves. He accepts, and in the easy quiet that follows, she pulls out a thick volume, a concise history of modern wizarding conflicts. Harry groans, half teasing, half curious. That sounds incredibly boring. Do wizards actually have modern conflicts if there was never some great war? Hermione smiles, thoughtful rather than defensive. That's what I want to find out. Everyone talks like it's peaceful, like it's always been peaceful. But that can't be the whole story, can it? There is no prophecy binding his life to a monster, no legend weighing down her every choice. Just two children, sharing sweets and questions, building a connection on curiosity instead of catastrophe. This isn't a story about removing all danger. This is a story about shifting the emotional baseline. When courage meets brilliance here, it's not in a bathroom with a troll or in a tent under siege, but in a quiet compartment where they joke that wizarding history sounds dull, without heroes and villains, and then both secretly wonder if that's true. We're exploring what happens when their bond isn't forged by constant crisis, but by the slow discovery that they think alike, worry alike, hope alike. Most importantly, we're watching a version of Harry and Hermione who have space to choose each other without the world ending around them. And then we snap back. The train whistle fades. The sunlight dies. We are once again in a grey London orphanage with a boy named Tom and a man named Dumbledore, standing at the edge of choices that will, quietly, decide whether that compartment ever exists. What kind of Hogwarts has to exist to produce the Harry and Hermione we just saw? What kind of headmaster? What kind of house rivalries? What kind of history curriculum in a world without a Dark Lord? We'll examine that next, because if the storm never breaks, the castle itself must change, or risk creating a different darkness entirely. Slytherin's heir, reframed, Tom's early Hogwarts years. If the castle has to change, then so does the boy who once tried to bend it to his will. So we drop into another September night, another flotilla of first-year boats cutting across the black glass of the lake, and we ask, what if Tom Riddle's first real homecoming felt less like conquest and more like a test? The air is cold enough to sting, lanterns sway, painting streaks of gold on the water. Tom sits rigid in the prow, fingers white on the edge of the boat, drinking everything in with a hunger that is almost painful. The looming silhouette of the towers, the wet slap of the oars, the murmur of awe from children who have never seen magic made solid. This is the moment he has always imagined, the orphan boy arriving at the fortress that will finally prove he is extraordinary. Inside the great hall, the sensory assault only intensifies. The ceiling is a stormy mirror of the night outside. The candles float, the tables roar with conversation. When Professor McGonagall calls, "Riddle, Tom," he walks forward with absolute control, but his heart is hammering. The sorting hat drops over his eyes, and for a breath the world narrows to darkness, and an old voice in his head. Ah, power, control, a mind like a blade. Slytherin would welcome you, but there is something else. A capacity for loyalty if it is ever returned. The pause stretches. Tom's jaw tightens. He will not beg. You would thrive in Slytherin, the hat concludes, if you are taught what to value. And then, aloud, the inevitable. Slytherin. Canon gives us the triumphant smirk. Here, we're exploring something more fragile. Dumbledore's eyes are on him not with suspicion alone, but with a conscious decision already forming. This isn't a story about leaving an 11-year-old to his own devices. This is a story about regular check-ins in a quiet transfiguration office, about Dumbledore asking, "Who have you eaten with this week, Tom?" as carefully as he asks about homework. Slughorn joins the project without quite realizing it. He invites Tom to his little supper club earlier than in canon, praising his discipline, his questions, his immaculate essays on magical theory. Flattery is still a tool, but it's no longer the only nourishment Tom receives. When Slughorn gently redirects his fascination with souls toward the ethics of experimental charms, when Dumbledore raises an eyebrow at the way Tom orders other children about in group work, the boy feels something unfamiliar, resistance that does not abandon him. Inside, the conflict sharpens. He still craves superiority. He still loves the quiet thrill of making things happen that no one else can. But now, when he answers correctly in charms, and the class actually applauds, when a professor says, "Excellent work, Riddle," without fear in their voice, cruelty stops being his only proof that he matters. Power can come from excellence, from being needed, from being admired. And then there is the relationship that canon never allowed him. A Muggle-born Slytherin girl with a Muggle surname that makes his lip curl on the first day, or a Ravenclaw boy who beats him to an arithmancy answer and then offers to share notes. They argue about blood purity in the library, parchment between them like a dueling line. "If Muggles are worthless," she says quietly, "why did it hurt you so much to grow up among them?" The question lands like a hex. He does not answer, but he comes back the next evening, and the next, and slowly the debates turn into something like companionship, not worship, not fear, a bond he did not orchestrate. Most importantly, Hogwarts itself begins to press against his older, darker inheritance. Late one night, Tom stands alone in the Slytherin common room. The lake presses green against the windows. The fire burns low. His hand rests on the damp stone, and beneath his palm, he feels it, an ancient whisper, a serpentine presence, the basilisk dreaming in the veins of the castle. The chamber is there, waiting, promising him a secret power that would belong to him alone. He could open it. He could repeat the canon script and let the monster loose. Instead, he closes his eyes and thinks of Dumbledore's questions, Slughorn's pride, the Muggle-born who looked him in the eye without flinching. For now, he chooses silence. He keeps the secret buried, not out of mercy exactly, but because the old path suddenly feels smaller. The chamber sleeps. The boy walks away. But how long can a power like that stay ignored in a castle that still whispers about greatness and destiny? We'll examine that tension next, because delaying the darkness is not the same as destroying it, and love, even in its earliest, most uncertain forms, is about deciding which part of yourself you will feed. The chamber that doesn't open, yet, testing Tom's choices. The chamber sleeps. The boy walks away, but delay is not erasure, and Hogwarts in Tom Riddle's 4th year is already humming with a different kind of threat. Strange things begin to happen long before any door actually opens. Muggleborns finding their ink pots shattered by invisible hands, cold drafts breathing through corridors that should be sealed, whispers in the plumbing that only certain students notice, and only one boy can fully understand, because now Tom knows what he is. Half-blood, heir of Slytherin, a name that once meant love and lineage and a proud manor, now reduced to a ruined shack and a dead gaunt on a ministry report. What if the moment he learns Parseltongue isn't just a trick of birth, but a birthright, lines up perfectly with a castle that has always been waiting for him? One evening, following the echo of a hiss only he can hear, Tom traces the pipes, the stones, the patterns that no one else has ever quite seen. The sinks in Moaning Myrtle's future bathroom, the tiny carving of a snake, the thrill when the word leaves his mouth and the porcelain shutters aside. The descent is slow and breathless, wet stone. The smell of age, a corridor that feels like the inside of his own ambition, and then the basilisk. It is not just a monster, it is a mirror for the part of him that believes he was born to command. Yellow eyes he does not meet directly, a body like a coiled promise. When it hears his voice, it stills. When he tells it to move, it moves. Control, absolute and intoxicating. For a heartbeat, this is a story about power finally answering a boy who has always been helpless. But memory interrupts. The orphanage matron's thin hand, not loving but steady, pulling him back from pushing another child down the stairs. The first adult who reached him earlier in this timeline, taking his wrist when he tried to pocket a silver trinket and saying quietly, "You don't have to be what they expect, Tom." And Dumbledore, watching him in class, gaze sharp but not yet condemning, as if they are in this together, as if Tom's brilliance is something worth fighting for. Above, the castle moves on. A Muggle-born girl, his friend now, not just a name on a roster, slips on an enchanted staircase prank gone wrong. No basilisk, no curse, just blood on stone, the panic of students, the way her fingers clutch at his sleeve when he reaches the hospital wing. "Am I less?" she whispers, half drugged by Scaligro, echoing words he has heard in pureblood mouths. Tom hears the basilisk in his mind, eager, waiting. He hears the Gaunts, raving about purity. He hears that earlier mentor, and Dumbledore, and something more profound than ideology, the fragile, bewildering bond of someone trusting him to stay. So he makes a compromised choice. He orders the basilisk back. He seals the chamber. He lies, smoothly, perfectly, about ever finding it. No attacks, no dead girl, no framing Hagrid. In canon, he chooses open violence. Here, he chooses hidden potential, a weapon buried instead of unleashed. This isn't a story about instant redemption. It's about a boy learning that love, or the closest thing he has to it, can pull him away from the edge without erasing the cliff. The basilisk sleeps. The chamber darkens. Tom walks back into Torchlight, more entangled in Hogwarts than he was ever allowed to be. His future no longer a straight line toward Voldemort, but a knot of possibilities. Most importantly, the secret is still there. So what happens when the world pushes him again, harder, and the only thing that ever truly obeyed him is waiting in the dark? We're exploring that next, because a closed door in magic is never just a door, it's a promise, and promises like this do not stay quiet forever. Slughorn's real lesson, Horcruxes, alchemy, and fear of death. The room is thick with candle smoke and secrets when it finally happens. Tom Riddle sits opposite Horace Slughorn, eyes gleaming, the air around him carrying that familiar, eerie charm. But this time, there's a difference. Slughorn has already had tea with Dumbledore, already heard the quiet warning about a brilliant boy who asks questions that feel just a little too cold. What if? Tom says lightly, rolling the words like silk between his fingers. A wizard didn't have to accept death at all. What if there were methods? In canon, this is where Slughorn flinches, where fear and vanity twist his memory into something ugly. Here, he feels the same chill, but he does not look away. He hears Dumbledore's voice, remembers the lonely boy in the orphanage file, and makes a different choice. "You're asking about Horcruxes," Slughorn says quietly, not a question, a naming. Tom stills. The word, spoken aloud, should have sent the old man into a panic. Instead, Slughorn leans forward, and we can feel the moment pivot, like a door that might close or open onto something more profound. "This isn't a story about clever tricks to live forever, my boy," he continues. This is a story about what fear does to a soul. Wizards who chased immortality through mutilation always paid. Always. They lost their minds, their loves, their very sense of self. They were remembered, yes, but as warnings. Tom listens, mask perfect, but something flickers. Slughorn sees it. We're exploring a Tom whose hunger isn't only for domination, it's for security, for never being powerless again. And so Slughorn does something extraordinary for him. He offers another kind of power. Have you read much on alchemy? Slughorn asks, almost casually. On healing magic, on the philosophers who believed that transfiguration of the soul could happen through creation rather than tearing it apart. Pattern interrupt. Tom had expected denial, not invitation. Slughorn talks of Nicholas Flamel not as a hoarder of life, but as a scholar who chose to let the stone go. He speaks of great healers who changed the course of history by curing curses, of theorists who brushed the boundary of life with experimental charms that mended minds instead of ripping them. Legacy, he says, and Tom's eyes sharpen. You want to be remembered, I understand, but the most powerful wizards in our world are not the ones we fear at night. They're the ones whose work we still study 100 years later. That is something worth fighting for. What if the boy who would have been Voldemort realizes in this dim office that respect can be its own form of control, that if he becomes the scholar everyone cites, the innovator whose theories reshape magic itself, he will always be in their minds without ever having to haunt their nightmares? Tom leans in now, genuinely. If I wanted to pursue that, what would I need to read? Slughorn hesitates, and then chooses, deliberately. I have a research circle, he says. Advanced, private, I think you'd be perfect together with a few others. I can arrange supervised access to certain restricted texts on alchemy, on soul magic ethics, on healing theory. You'll examine the boundaries, but you will not cross them alone. Most importantly, he decides not to push Tom away in fear, but to keep him close, to wrap that dangerous brilliance in structure, in mentorship, in connection. And as Tom leaves with a stack of carefully chosen books and an invitation, the future tilts again. No oath, no dark mark, just a new obsession taking root. So what happens when the wizarding world's almost villain becomes its most promising young researcher instead? And what price does that gentler path still demand? Tom Riddle, reluctant reformer, post-Hogwarts. Without disappearance, he does not vanish. That is the first fracture line from canon. No mysterious disappearance into the wilds of Europe, no whispered rumors about a brilliant graduate traveling while he actually hunts for murder and immortality. Instead, Tom Riddle walks out of Hogwarts with his NEWTS, his polished charm, and, thanks to Dumbledore's intervention, an offer he cannot resist. A research post that flatters his ego and keeps him firmly in the light. We're exploring a world where Tom accepts. Some evenings he lectures in the very classrooms where he once plotted alone. Now dazzling 7th years, with elegant proofs in magical theory, unspooling the mathematics of wards and the psychology of fear. Other days, he descends into the Department of Mysteries, consulting on experimental containment spells. Always watched, always recorded, always accountable. What if that visibility becomes its own kind of leash? The old pureblood families notice him first. In drawing rooms lined with ancestral portraits, they speak his name with interest. Here is a brilliant half-blood who speaks their language of legacy and order, who can quote obscure genealogy and curse law, who never quite condemns their views, only reframes them. He attends their dinners, accepts their patronage, lets their daughters and sons orbit him like moths around blue flame. Yet the progressives cannot dismiss him either. His papers on ethically binding cursed artifacts, his proposal for standardizing memory magic audits at St. Mungo's. These are actually extraordinary. Dangerous, yes, but precise, elegant, undeniably useful. Even those who distrust his smile admit, reluctantly, that the wizarding world is safer when Tom Riddle is designing the locks. Dumbledore hovers at the edge of all this. Headmaster now, beard a little longer, eyes a little sadder. He invites Tom back for guest seminars, asks pointed questions in front of students, praises the work while quietly probing the motives. He knows that Tom's fear of death has not vanished. It has simply changed vocabulary. Where once Tom sought Horcruxes, he now speaks of institutional continuity, of ensuring that no single mortal's weakness can endanger the whole system. This isn't a story about redemption through love or sudden conscience. This is a story about pressure being redirected. Tom's hunger for control pours not into secret rituals, but into policy debates at the Wiesengemot, academic rivalries in journals, fierce arguments over who should hold the keys to the most dangerous spells ever devised. Publicly, he becomes a controversial intellectual. He writes essays arguing that certain branches of magic, possession, blood rituals, large-scale memory alteration, must be licensed to a tiny, rigorously tested cadre, not out of compassion, but because power, he insists, must reside with the responsible, with those who have proven they can bear it. With people like him, do we see the twist? The rhetoric is safety, the reality is centralization. Most importantly, the world listens. Not everyone agrees, not everyone obeys, but the center of gravity shifts. There are no masked Death Eaters stalking the night, no open war scarring playgrounds, no prophecy hanging over a baby's crib. Instead, there is something more profound and more insidious, a wizarding Britain quietly reorganizing itself around Tom's ideas, its institutions thickening, its freedoms narrowing, its future bending. By the time Lily Evans, James Potter, and their friends arrive at Hogwarts, there is no Dark Lord waiting in the shadows. There is a famous scholar on the front page of the Daily Prophet, a name on half the new laws, a presence in every debate about what magic should be. The war we know has not happened, but a different kind of tension is already humming in the walls. So when that new generation walks into this reordered world, what do they rebel against? And who do they become, standing in the long, quiet shadow of Tom Riddle's reforms? Marauders in a quieter storm, Lily, James, and Snape, under Tom's shadow Hogwarts, in their era, does not echo with the name of a Dark Lord. It hums with something quieter, and in some ways more insidious. Policy debates in the Great Hall, impassioned speeches in the common rooms, Tom Riddle's essays passed around like sacred texts. What if the Marauders' years aren't about choosing sides in a war, but about choosing what kind of future they can live with? This isn't a story about recruitment into masked terror. It's about late-night arguments over the Daily Prophet, prefect meetings that feel like miniature Wiesengemot sessions, and a headmaster whose presence at the staff table is both reassuring and unsettling. Tom Riddle is there in school history lectures, in Slughorn's fond anecdotes, in the way certain Slytherins quote his clarity on bloodlines as if it were scripture. No one is handing out dark marks. They're handing out pamphlets. In that world, Severus Snape's path bends, but it doesn't break. He doesn't hover on the edge of Death Eater initiation. He hovers on the edge of academic radicalism. The friends he falls in with aren't future killers, but brilliant, sharp-tongued idealists who idolize Riddle's theories on magical hierarchy, on efficient governance, on the dangerous volatility of Muggle technology. We're exploring a Snape whose attraction to the dark is almost painfully intellectual. Footnotes and counter-arguments, not curses and skulls. Yet the core is the same: resentment, loneliness. The seductive promise that if he aligns with Riddle's vision, the world that has always looked down on him will finally have to listen. Lily Evans, by contrast, walks into this charged atmosphere and falls in love with magic while refusing to fall in line. In canon, her defiance becomes a private act of protection. Here, it becomes public. She writes blistering letters to the Prophet about werewolf employment discrimination, stands up in Transfiguration to question why Muggleborns are underrepresented in ministry internships, and most dangerously, challenges Tom himself when he visits Hogwarts to give a visionary lecture on wizarding law. Imagine that moment, the Great Hall silent, Riddle's voice smooth, Lily's hand rising, her questions precise and unflinching. She is not being hunted by him, she is confronting him, in full view of everyone. And James Potter? He can't just be the carefree golden boy, not when his family's name is engraved on half the buildings that benefit from the very hierarchies Tom wants to entrench. He grows up hearing his parents praise Riddle as practical, hearing that pure-blood philanthropy is proof the system works. When James clashes with Snape now, it isn't only over Lily or schoolyard insults, it's over what their families stand for. James the prankster is forced to become James the questioner, James the heir, who has to decide whether his loyalty is to his lineage or to his conscience. Most importantly, there is no prophecy murmured in a smoky room, no mark searing anyone's arm. There is only a slow, dawning realization that neutrality is a choice in favor of the status quo. Lily and James don't go into hiding, they go into organizing. Quiet meetings at Potter Manor, anonymous essays in underground journals. A different kind of order, born not from open war, but from moral refusal. They survive. But what does survival mean in a world where Tom Riddle wins without ever casting an unforgivable, and where the child they raise grows up not as the boy who lived, but as the boy who has to decide whether his parents were right? Because the next generation will inherit not a battlefield, but a system, and systems, as we'll examine next, can be even harder to fight. The prophecy that never was. Unmaking the boy who lived, because the next generation will inherit not a battlefield, but a system. And systems, as we'll examine next, can be even harder to fight. But what if, in another branch of this universe, the system never hardens into open war at all? What if Tom Riddle's rise flickers, falters, and finally fails so early that Sybil Trelawney's famous words are never spoken in that smoky room above the Hog's Head, or if they are, they land in a world that simply doesn't know what to do with them? No Dark Lord stalking the headlines, no string of mysterious disappearances, no clear one with the power to vanquish him, to hang a prophecy on. Dumbledore might hear a fragment, frown, and file it away with a dozen other half-visions that never quite come true. The Department of Mysteries might yawn. The glass sphere might never be born. This isn't a story about destiny crystallizing around a name. This is a story about what grows in the quiet when destiny doesn't call. In that quiet, Lily Evans and James Potter still fall in love. They still collide in arguments about blood prejudice, still fly side by side for the Order during a shorter, less catastrophic conflict, still choose each other with the reckless certainty of people who believe they might actually live to see their 30s. When they marry, it's not in hiding under Fidelius, but in a world cautiously exhaling, treaties signed, radicals monitored, reforms debated in the Wiesengemot rather than fought in the streets. Harry is born into that exhale. He grows up in a Godric's Hollow, where the cottage windows are not barred, but flung open, where his father's laughter is as constant as the whir of his mother's experimental charms. James is the Auror, who helped take down Riddle's early circle before it metastasized. Lily is the Muggle-born researcher whose work on protective magic quietly changed Ministry protocol. Their reputations are legendary in a bureaucratic, slightly embarrassing way. Parents point them out in The Prophet, professors drop their names, and Harry, loved to the point of suffocation some days, has to live with that. He's stubborn, as in canon, quick to defend the underdog, quick to throw himself between a friend and danger, but the edge is different. There are no cupboard years, no Dursley cruelty teaching him that love is conditional and rare. His baseline is not prove you won't leave me, but prove I'm more than their son. That single shift rewires everything. When McGonagall sets him straight, he argues back, not from trauma, but conviction. When Dumbledore twinkles, Harry is polite, but not awed. He's heard his parents dissect that twinkle over late-night tea. He isn't scanning every adult for a lost mother or a missing father. He's looking for partners, equals, people he can stand beside rather than beneath. So when he meets Hermione Granger on the Hogwarts Express, the connection that forms between them is not a lifeline for a drowning boy, but a meeting of minds that already know their own worth. He doesn't cling, he chooses. She doesn't rescue, she collaborates. Their bond has room to become something more profound, because it isn't compensating for a wound as raw. Pattern interrupt. Without the boy who lived, does Harry even become the boy who leads? Most importantly, if he isn't defined by survival, what does he live for? Glory, justice, love. When the world isn't constantly ending, who does he choose to stand with? Not out of desperation, but desire. Those are the questions this quieter, more dangerous timeline will force him to answer. Hermione Granger, unburdened and unafraid, a different kind of brilliant. So if Harry isn't defined by survival, if the world isn't burning the moment he arrives, who grows up in that quieter space? Who becomes the mind, the heart, the conscience that will one day stand beside him by choice rather than destiny? In this timeline, that answer begins in a perfectly ordinary Muggle living room, with a girl whose parents have never heard the name Voldemort. Hermione Granger's childhood is still marked by difference, but not by inherited terror. Her dentist parents don't spend nights whispering about a war they barely survived, or a Dark Lord who might return. For them, the Hogwarts letter is not a reprieve from fear, it's an earthquake of the unknown. Magic is exhilarating, yes, but it is also a boarding school in a hidden castle run by strangers, full of powers they cannot understand, and dangers they can't even name. Their worry for her safety isn't about specific horrors, it's about the yawning blank of a world they can't protect her in. Without tales of you-know-who, Hermione's resolve hardens differently. She still reads everything. She still memorizes Hogwarts, a history before the train leaves the station, but she isn't arming herself against a society poised to hate her. She's preparing for an exam no one else knows is coming, an exam she has written for herself. Prove that this extraordinary world made a mistake, or prove that it didn't. So when she steps into Hogwarts, she is still bookish, still intense, still the girl with her hand in the air before the question is finished. Yet there's a touch less defensive steel in her spine. She isn't braced for slurs, for whispers about blood status charged by the memory of war. The prejudice is there in the corridors, because canon tells us it always was, but it's background noise rather than a battle drum. She's proving herself to herself, not to a tribunal of pure-blood judges. That shift changes everything. With no immediate existential threat hanging over every year, Hermione has time to be 11, 12, 13, in a way canon almost never allows her. She joins more clubs. She loses herself in arithmancy, not just as a weapon, but as a joy. She writes letters home that are not carefully edited reports from a war zone, but breathless accounts of moving staircases, enchanted ceilings, and the first time she flies without feeling like she will fall. And because fear is not devouring every spare thought, her emotional world expands. She notices the way a Ravenclaw boy blushes when she explains a spell. She has space for crushes that are awkward and tender, for friendships that aren't triage, but choice. This isn't a story about stripping away her seriousness. This is a story about adding color to it, about letting her brilliance make room for vulnerability, curiosity, even a little recklessness. In that extra space, another fascination grows. What if, in a school that still whispers about great minds and great reformers, the name everyone invokes isn't Dumbledore's alone, but Tom Riddle's? Not as a ghost of horror, but as the brilliant head boy who modernized curricula, who advised the Ministry on Muggle relations, who wrote essays on magical ethics that first years still quote. We're exploring a world where his intellectual legacy is everywhere. Marginal notes in old Transfiguration texts, footnotes in defense theory, portraits of him speaking in calm, persuasive tones at Wizengamot debates. Hermione, who has always worshipped at the altar of ideas, can't ignore that. She reads his speeches on blood equality, his proposals for orphanage reform, his arguments about regulating dangerous artifacts rather than banning them outright. She underlines his sentences, debates them in the margins, feels that electric connection you get when you encounter a mind that might actually rival your own. Tom Riddle becomes for her not a dark cautionary tale, but a living question. How far can brilliance bend the world before it breaks? Most importantly, this foundation means that when she eventually meets Harry, she doesn't orbit him as a narrative accessory. She arrives in his life already in motion, with loyalties, ambitions, and private intellectual arguments with a man she has never met. Her potential love for Harry, if it blooms, will not be the universe snapping two destined pieces together. It will be a decision made by a girl who has already learned to choose her school, her causes, her heroes, on her own terms. And in a world where Tom Riddle is not a monster in the shadows, but a luminary in the light, what happens when that girl finally sees the man behind the footnotes? First train, first spark. Harry and Hermione meet without a scar. She does not see him in a courtroom or a newspaper column. She sees him first in a reflection. The train window is a dark mirror, London sliding away behind it, and Harry's face is caught between his parents' world and something new. No scar, no prophecy, just a boy with Lily's eyes, James's old cloak folded beside him on the seat, and a packed lunch his mum insisted on labeling with a neat little charm. He's excited, but the excitement has edges. Too many trunks, too many voices in the corridor, too many expectations that come with the surname Potter. He has retreated to a half-empty compartment near the back, the way you or I might step outside a crowded party just to breathe. The express shudders into speed. The trolley rattles past. For a moment, he is alone with the soft weight of James's cloak under his hand, with the knowledge that his father once rode this same train, laughed in these same corridors, made friends that became legends. What if, in this quieter world, the legend feels heavier than the danger ever did in canon? The door slides open, with a hesitant scrape. A girl stands there, hair already frizzing from the steam, her new robe slightly askew from an earlier, awkward attempt to sit with some older students who had not been unkind, exactly, but had not known what to do with her either. Everywhere else is full, she says, though it isn't entirely true. May I sit here? Harry nods, relieved without quite knowing why. Yeah. Of course. She hoists her trunk in with more determination than technique. Their shoulders brush as he moves to help, a small, unplanned collision that sends a faint jolt through the air. Not dramatic, not destiny, just two 11-year-olds saying a wordless excuse me at the same time, and then, unexpectedly, laughing. This isn't a story about lightning scars and whispered prophecies, we remind ourselves as we watch them. This is a story about a different kind of pressure, about what happens when love and expectation replace fear and survival. "I'm Hermione Granger," she says quickly, as if she has rehearsed it. "I've read all about your parents. Lily Evans, first Muggle-born head girl in decades, and James Potter, head boy, war hero, all that." "It must be extraordinary." Harry flushes. "It's mostly just loud," he admits. "What's it like, not growing up with magic at all?" And there it is. Curiosity meeting curiosity, question answering question. He asks about televisions and buses and what it feels like to push a trolley through a solid barrier when you've never seen a ghost. She asks about Quidditch and house elves and whether his mum really brewed an entire line of experimental protective potions during the war that never quite was. They lean over one of her books, Hogwarts, a history, of course, heads nearly touching as she points out the moving staircases and he traces the tiny inked Quidditch pitch with his finger. Their shoulders rest together now, not by accident, but by simple, unthinking comfort. Most importantly, we're exploring how an easy, unforced intimacy can begin without trauma as its foundation. "You've really memorized all this?" Harry asks, half awed. "Well, not all of it," she says, though they both know she's lying. "I've been reading other things too, about famous witches and wizards, reformers, people who change the way our world treats Muggleborns." She turns a page in another book, fingers lingering on a photograph of a much younger man with dark hair and searching eyes standing beside a stern but oddly fond-looking Dumbledore. "Like him," Hermione says, almost casually. "Tom Riddle. They say without him, people like me might never have felt safe coming to Hogwarts at all." The train roars into a tunnel. For a heartbeat, their compartment is swallowed in shadow, her words hanging between them like a spell, and we have to ask, when the light returns, what else will they see in that name? Year 1, without a troll, a softer catalyst for trust. The train bursts back into daylight, and that name lingers between them, Tom Riddle. Not as a ghost of terror, but as a quiet, complicated promise. What if the boy who never became Voldemort has already changed everything, long before Harry ever sets foot in the castle? We see it most clearly in first year, in a moment that never makes it into legend because there's no troll, no shattered bathroom, no frantic dash through corridors. Instead, there is a lesson. Charms. Late in the afternoon, desks crowded with borrowed wands and bright excitement, Flitwick produces a delicate, spinning orb from a velvet-lined box, explaining that it's an old diagnostic artifact designed to react to uncontrolled magic. Harmless, in theory. Beautiful, in theory. Until Seamus, eager and reckless, mispronounces a stabilizing charm. The orb fractures with a sound like breaking ice, and raw magic lashes out across the room. A girl from Hufflepuff crumples, her arm gone limp, her eyes unfocused. It isn't war. It isn't canon-level catastrophe. But to 11-year-olds who have never seen magic hurt someone, it feels enormous. Hermione's first instinct is to shout for the professor, to reach for rules and authority, because that is what safety has always meant to her. Harry's first instinct is to move, to put himself between the wild, sparking fragments and everyone else, because he has always met fear by stepping forward. For a heartbeat, they clash, words sharp, fear sharper. Then, they both see the same thing. Flitwick stunned, winded by the backlash, the orb still bleeding power. This isn't a story about choosing rebellion over order. This is a story about learning how those things can stand together. Hermione, breathing fast, drags Harry back behind an overturned desk, and, in that cramped shelter, they make a decision. She will think 3 steps ahead, he will take the physical risk, and they will move as one. She remembers an obscure counter-hex she read 3 weeks ago. He volunteers to cross the open floor and anchor the spell directly against the fractured orb. She talks him through every syllable, voice steady even as her hands shake. He feels the sting of wild magic against his skin and stays there anyway. Together, they contain it, not perfectly, not heroically, but effectively enough that by the time other teachers arrive, the danger is already fading. Most importantly, this quiet crisis sets their pattern. When chaos meets logic, when courage meets brilliance, when two children who do not yet know about prophecies or destinies still choose each other's strengths over their own fear, something more profound than simple friendship begins to take root. Ron is there for all of it, cracked jokes dying on his lips when the orb explodes, loyalty written plain on his freckled face as he hovers at Harry's side. He's still a friend, still the one who smuggles chocolate frogs into the hospital wing later and complains loudly about homework, but without a troll and a near-death rescue welding him and Harry into an immediate primary bond. The emotional gravity shifts. The triangle forms more slowly, less violently, and the axis tilts just a little toward the girl who planned the solution, while everyone else froze. Pattern interrupt. There is no feast, no house points awarded in a blaze of glory. Instead, there is the soft, antiseptic quiet of the hospital wing. The Hufflepuff girl sleeps, her arm bound in shimmering bandages. Harry dozes in the next bed, skin still tingling from the magical backlash. Hermione sits between them with a book open, reading aloud more to steady herself than to entertain him. Lily arrives on silent feet, having argued her way past Madame Pomfrey with a mother's gentle ferocity. She pauses in the doorway, watching. Harry's hair is a dark mess against the pillow. Hermione's voice is low, precise, but every few sentences she glances up to check his breathing, his expression, as if calibrating her words to his rest. Lily doesn't interrupt. She simply stands there and feels it. The strange early weight of this connection, the way her son's hand has, without his noticing, drifted closer to Hermione's on the blanket. This isn't a story about love at 11, it's about recognition. About a woman who once followed a brilliant boy into a war that never happened, now seeing something worth fighting for in the quiet loyalty of a girl who stayed. When Hermione finally looks up and sees her, there's a flash of panic, of apology, of that instinctive rule-following deference. Lily just smiles and moves closer, resting a hand on Harry's ankle, grounding him. "You were reading to him?" she asks, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Hermione nods, cheeks pink. He sleeps better with someone here," she says softly. Lily hears what Hermione does not say. So do I. And in that small, fragile, utterly ordinary moment, the future shifts again. No Dark Lord, no prophecy. Just a boy, a girl, and a mother who understands that the real magic isn't in the crises they survive, but in who they choose to sit beside after the danger has passed. We're exploring a world where that choice, made early and quietly, will echo through every year to come. Tom Riddle, professor of the dark arts, the man who never fell. So what happens to that quiet, rewritten future when the man who never became a monster walks back into their lives as an authority figure? What if the name that once meant terror in canon now means excellence, controversy, and something Harry and Hermione can't quite define? By the time Harry and Hermione return to Hogwarts in this timeline, Tom Riddle is no longer the Ministry's brilliant enigma. After years in the Department of Mysteries, dissecting cursed objects instead of creating them, after drafting legislation that actually reins in blood purity rhetoric instead of feeding it, he finally accepts the job that, in canon, he cursed. Defense against the dark arts is no longer a revolving door. Under Tom Riddle, it has become the post everyone whispers about with awe. 7 consecutive years. No mysterious illnesses, no tragic accidents, just results. We're exploring a world where the man who might have shattered his soul instead spends it cataloging the ways souls break. Where the boy who opened the Chamber of Secrets in canon now spends late nights in his office, writing curriculum about how to survive basilisk venom and cursed diaries, and no one quite realizes how much of it reads like confession. Harry's first sight of him is almost disappointingly human. No red eyes, no snake-like face, just a tall, impeccably dressed wizard with perfect posture and a voice like velvet over steel. But there is something, a pull, a sense that the air tightens when Tom looks his way. Harry feels, without knowing why, as if he's standing near a thunderstorm that has decided, for now, not to break. Hermione, though. Hermione is caught from the first lecture. Tom speaks about dark magic the way she has always suspected it should be spoken about, not as forbidden temptation, not as a thrill, but as a branch of magical theory. He asks, what if understanding is the only real protection? He walks them through the structure of a basic hex, the emotional logic of a curse, the way love and hatred leave different signatures on the same spell. This isn't a story about glorifying the darkness. This is a story about refusing to be ignorant of it. He recognizes their names before they sit down. Potter, Granger, Lily's son, with her eyes, and James's restless energy. The Muggle-born whose exam scores have already caused arguments in the Department of Education. In another life, they might have been his enemies or his pawns. Here, he makes a different, equally calculated choice. He will invest, he will test, he will see what happens when raw courage and relentless intellect are shaped rather than merely observed. Dumbledore feels the shift like a change in pressure. For decades, he has managed Tom's influence with gentle hands and firm boundaries. Praise here, a quiet warning there, always the unspoken truth that some doors will remain closed to him. Now he watches as Tom steps in front of a classroom and does what Dumbledore has always done, captivates the young, including the boy, who, in another world, would have been a prophecy made flesh. There is respect between them. There is also a line. When Tom encourages debate about the ethics of unforgivables in purely theoretical terms, Dumbledore's eyes sharpen. When Harry and Hermione stay after class to ask for extra reading, Dumbledore's gaze lingers on their retreating backs, calculating the cost of letting this bond form. Most importantly, he wonders if his faith in Tom is love, or simply another gamble. The charged moment comes on an ordinary Tuesday. Tom pairs Harry and Hermione for a complex shielding exercise, a hybrid spell he designed himself to deflect both physical and emotional attacks. Their fingers lace without discussion, their magic rising together in that by now familiar way. Two wands, one intention, one shimmering barrier arching between them and Tom's probing spell. The room falls silent. Their shield holds. "Excellent, Mr. Potter, Miss Granger," Tom says, and there is actual warmth in it. "That bond of yours is extraordinary. Do not let anyone convince you it is anything less than something worth fighting for." His gaze lingers on their joined hands, a heartbeat too long. Dumbledore, watching from the doorway, sees it. Harry feels a flicker of pride and unease. Hermione feels understood and appraised in the same breath. Three lives intersect, just for a moment. The headmaster who fears what this could become, the professor who believes he can guide what he once almost destroyed, and the two students whose love and connection might save this gentler world, or, if misled, doom it in a quieter, more insidious way. And as their hands finally slip apart, none of them realize that the real test of this altered timeline has just begun. Analysis break. Mentor, monster, or mirror. Their hands slip apart, but the real tension doesn't. It just changes shape, because now we have to ask, what if the greatest monster of the canon timeline has been rewritten into something far more dangerous to Harry and Hermione? A mentor, not a Dark Lord to defy, but a brilliant, wounded man who offers them exactly what they've always wanted, in a form that feels like love. Tom, as teacher, is immediately intoxicating. For Harry, he becomes the first adult who trains him without sentimentality or prophecy, who looks at his raw power and says calmly, "You could be extraordinary if you stop apologizing for it." James would have cheered from the stands, thrown an arm around his son, made a joke to soften the moment. Tom does the opposite. He tightens Harry's grip on his wand, corrects his stance, demands precision. No coddling, no legend, just work, and Harry drinks it in. Because this isn't a story about a boy defined by a scar anymore. This is a story about a boy finally being taken seriously as a magician. We're exploring a world where his benchmark isn't a faceless evil, but a living, breathing standard. Tom Riddle, the man who mastered magic young and never once pretended to be afraid of it. That changes Harry's internal landscape in a quiet, seismic way. In canon, he measures himself against Voldemort as an opposite. Love versus hate, self-sacrifice versus domination. Here, he starts measuring himself against Tom as a near future. When he hesitates to cast a ruthless shield in Dueling Club, he hears Tom's cool voice, asking whether he wants control or chaos. When he wins, he catches himself glancing toward Tom's expression before he looks for Hermione's. Approval becomes a kind of currency. Most importantly, Harry doesn't even realize the exchange rate is his own moral comfort. Hermione feels it too, but differently. Tom looks at her and sees not the brightest witch of her age as a slogan, but a colleague in miniature. He gives her arithmancy problems no one else would trust a student with, recommends obscure texts on magical theory, debates with her about the ethics of mind magic, instead of patting her on the head and changing the subject. It is everything she has always craved: respect, challenge, the sense that her mind is something worth fighting for, and yet his politics unsettle her. The way he talks about order, about necessary control, about how fear kept Wool's orphanage safe when kindness failed, those moments snag in her chest. She finds herself defending him to Harry one hour and dissecting his arguments the next, living in that uneasy space between admirer and critic. That tension will later mirror her role in Harry's life, the one who believes in his power and also questions what he's doing with it. Tom, Harry, Hermione. Together they form a thematic mirror. Tom is what Harry could become if he chooses control over vulnerability, brilliance over belonging. Harry and Hermione's bond is the counterweight, the reminder that love, not ambition, is the point. But in a world without a clear villain, how do you recognize when the person teaching you is slowly bending you toward their own unresolved fears? And when that person has, for the first time, made you feel truly seen, would you even want to? We'll examine that question in the next movement. As Tom's lessons grow sharper, the politics outside Hogwarts grow louder, and the line between protection and possession starts to blur. Year 3 as Catalyst, Dementors without a Dark Lord. The lake is frozen at the edges when everything quietly changes. No dark mark in the sky, no prophecy hanging over a boy's head, just cold, breathless air, and the question we keep circling. What if the real catalyst for Harry and Hermione wasn't war, but the way fear presses in when the world pretends it's at peace? Tom's reforms have divided that world. His push for Muggle-born rights, his crackdowns on corruption, his experiments with magical law. Some call it progress, others call it tyranny in prettier robes. And when a bombing at a ministry hearing kills 3 Wizengamot elders, the wizarding public needs a monster. They find one in Sirius Black, so the Dementors still come to Hogwarts. Officially, they're there to guard against an escaped political terrorist, the man who allegedly tried to assassinate Tom Riddle and slaughtered bystanders in the process. Unofficially, they are a reminder that this isn't a story about simple good and evil. This is a story about what happens when justice, fear, and love get tangled. Harry's first encounter on the train is still brutal. He has no memory of his parents dying, no canon echo of a woman's last scream, but he does have something else. The sound of his mother and father arguing in low, tired voices about Tom's new decrees, the night his dad packed a bag to go talk sense into Riddle, the weeks of silence that followed. When the Dementor leans in, it rips open that fear of loss, of failing the people who trust him, of watching adults he loves break under pressure he doesn't understand. He collapses. Hermione catches him, and from that moment, we're exploring a different kind of Patronus story. Hermione doesn't just research the charm, she decides quietly that she will not let Harry face that emptiness alone. They practice by the lake, breath ghosting in the air, scarves pulled up, wands drawn. On 3, she says, their hands brush as they lift their wands, fingers gloved, but still sparking with something they both pretend not to notice. 1, 2, 3, nothing, then a wisp, then something more. Around them, the political story tightens. Remus reveals that Sirius didn't target innocents randomly. He'd been part of a radical cell that believed Tom's reforms didn't go far enough. That power had to be torn from old families by force. Maybe Sirius was framed by those families. Maybe he really did let rage spill over into murder. Every account contradicts the last. For Harry, it shatters the clean lines he thought existed. Can rebellion become cruelty? Can a man be both victim and threat? Most importantly, what does it mean when the man the world calls a monster might also be the one who tried to protect his parents from the backlash to Tom's rise? The answer doesn't come in a courtroom, it comes at the lake. When a swarm of Dementors breaks from their posts, drawn to the chaos of a Quidditch match gone wrong, it's Harry and Hermione who reach the shore first. The cold is a living thing now, crawling under their skin. Harry staggers. Hermione grips his arm, nails biting through his sleeve. Together, she says, they cast as one, 2 voices, one spell, Expecto Patronum. This time, the silver doesn't sputter, it explodes. Twin Patronuses surge forward, overlapping, blinding, their shapes not yet fully formed, but undeniably intertwined as they drive the Dementors back in a sweeping arc. For a suspended second, Harry can't tell where his magic ends and hers begins. All he knows is the warmth flooding him isn't just happiness, it's her hand still on his arm, her eyes wide, shining, fixed on him like he's something worth fighting for. They stand there, panting, the world rushing back in. Neither speaks, neither moves away. And in that charged, extraordinary silence by the lake, the bond that has always held them together shifts. Just a fraction, just enough to be dangerous. Because if love can banish Dementors, what else might it challenge next? Especially when Tom Riddle himself starts to take notice. Romantic realization, the Patronus moment, reimagined. The Dementors fall back first. The cold does not. It lingers on their cheeks, a burning frost, the kind that makes skin ache and lungs sting. Harry can taste metal and lake water and fear, but under it, threading through it, there is Hermione's hand in his, small and shaking and absolutely real. The silver stag is still circling, hooves striking the surface of the lake with soundless impact, and for a suspended heartbeat, the world is nothing but light, breath, and the way she whispers his name. Harry, we're exploring a what if that lives in that whisper. What if the Patronus by the lake isn't just a display of raw power, but the moment his heart quietly, irrevocably chooses? He's cast the spell before. In practice, in theory, expecto patronum, with Lupin coaching, with chocolate after, with talk of Quidditch victories, and the first time he flew. But now, when the Dementors closed in, and the screaming in his head rose to a breaking point, it wasn't a snitch he reached for. It wasn't even his parents' faces. It was Hermione in the library, hair wild around her face, as she laughed at something only he would find funny. Hermione standing between him and Tom Riddle's cool logic, voice shaking but unyielding, as she argued that compassion mattered more than elegance in magic. That was the memory that answered him. That was the warmth that cut through the cold. And Hermione, for all her precision, is not prepared either. Her wand is still raised, fingers white at the knuckles, the echo of her own charm humming in her bones. In canon, her Patronus is incidental, background to Harry's miracle. Here, this isn't a story about background, this is a story about convergence. Because when she finally dares to focus, to test the spell again in the thinning dark, the otter that bursts from her wand is brighter than it has ever been. Not when she imagined top marks, not when she pictured winning every academic prize Tom once held. No, it flares when she thinks of Harry refusing to back down in Dumbledore's office, when he stands beside her as she questions Riddle himself about Dementors, about ethics, about whether power without mercy is worth anything at all. Her Patronus is built from his stubborn kindness, his from her fierce, inconvenient loyalty. Two separate spells, one shared source. They stand there, breath clouding between them, and when their eyes finally meet, the question is simple and terrifying. What just happened? Why does her pulse race harder now, with the danger receding, than it did when she thought they were about to die? Why does he feel more exposed in this quiet than he did screaming across the lake at 100 cloaked monsters? We'll examine the larger implications later, but most importantly, this is the first time they both realize that their happiest memories are no longer solitary. Happiness, for them, has become something plural, something more profound, something worth fighting for, and they are not alone. Across the lake, half veiled by trees and shadow, Tom Riddle watches. He has seen Patronus magic before. He has studied it, dissected it, dismissed it as sentimental. But this synchronized flare of light, this seamless overlap of intent, makes his eyes narrow because he recognizes power when he sees it. He recognizes a bond that does not bow to authority, not even his. If love can banish Dementors with that kind of effortless ferocity, what else might it banish, if left unchecked? His influence? His carefully curated role as mentor and moral center of Hogwarts? The stag and the otter circle once more, crossing paths in a shower of silver sparks, and Tom turns away, cloak snapping in the wind, already recalculating. The game has changed. And in the next section, we'll see what a man like Tom Riddle does when he finally identifies a threat he cannot fully control. Pattern interrupt Ron Weasley's quietly different life, but before we follow Tom's recalculations through the corridors of power, we need to step away from stags and otters and look at something quieter. What if the absence of a Dark Lord echoed not in prophecies or politics, but in the life of one freckled boy at the end of a hand-me-down table? Ron Weasley grows up in a world without war. The burrow is still cramped, still patched together by magic and Molly's determination, still echoing with shouting matches and laughter. The Weasleys are still poor. But their name is not whispered with contempt for Muggle lovers. It is spoken with a kind of weary respect. Arthur's fascination with plugs and buses is an eccentricity, not a political statement. So Ron's sting, when he looks at his two short robes and chipped wand, is less about taking sides and more about something rawer. Am I enough, even when no one is forcing me to prove it? Without Voldemort, there is no boy who lived. Harry arrives at Hogwarts as a curious, slightly overwhelmed boy with famous parents, not a walking legend. When he and Ron meet on the train, the chocolate frogs and shared jokes are still there. But the bond doesn't weld instantly under the weight of destiny. They become friends the way most people do, slowly, through late-night chess games, shared homework panic, and the discovery that they actually like being around each other when no one is in mortal peril. This changes everything and nothing. They still argue, they still make up, but the friendship is less a battlefield alliance and more a steady, mutual choice. Without trolls in bathrooms and cursed Quidditch brooms, Ron is not always the sidekick in Harry's shadow. Sometimes he is simply the boy across the table, who wins at wizard chess and listens when Harry talks about feeling ordinary in a house full of extraordinary Potters. And Hermione? Ron still finds her bossy, brilliant, infuriating. She still corrects his homework, still rolls her eyes when he leaves essays to the last moment, but without life or death adventures pressing them together, his fluttering crush never crystallizes into the same sharp, aching intensity we know from canon. There is no Yule Ball explosion built on years of swallowed fear, no war-torn tent where jealousy festers beside hunger. Instead, there is space. Space for Harry and Hermione's connection to deepen into something more profound, and space for Ron to see it without feeling like the universe has personally rejected him. In that space, Ron's own strengths begin to stand out. His strategic mind shows up not only on a giant chessboard, but in Quidditch tactics, in quietly clever suggestions during defense practice, in the way he can read a room faster than either of his friends. He becomes the one who cracks a tense silence with an honest question, the one who notices when Hermione is pushing herself too hard, the one who tells Harry, in a rare moment of absolute clarity, that love is something worth fighting for, even when it scares you. We're exploring a world where his future isn't defined by following a chosen one into battle. Without a Dark Lord, Auror work is about complex investigations and ministry reform, not survival. Ron might actually thrive there, hunting down corruption, or helping Arthur reshape Muggle relations from the inside. Most importantly, this isn't a story about sidelining Ron for the sake of a pairing. This is a story about rebalancing the trio when the world is less on fire, about what emerges when friendship isn't forged only in trauma, and as Tom Riddle turns toward influence instead of open war, Ron's quieter evolution will matter more than anyone expects. Because when the threat is subtle, who better to see it than the boy who has always watched from the edges? Year 4. Tension, the tournament that shouldn't exist. When the threat is subtle, it doesn't arrive with skulls in the sky. It arrives with banners, fanfare, and a ministry-approved slogan about unity. So what if, in this calmer, post-warless timeline, the great danger of Harry's 4th year isn't a resurrected Dark Lord, but a tournament that should never have come back at all? It's Tom who sells it to the Wizengamot. We're exploring a man who has learned to trade terror for influence, who stands in those polished chambers and speaks, not of glory, but of controlled, institutionalized risk. The Triwizard Tournament, he argues, will showcase magical prowess, bind schools together, and prove that this new, stable world can handle danger without collapsing into fear. No Death Eaters, no prophecy, just spectacle, just politics. Of course, that's the story on the posters. Underneath, this is a story about image. About a ministry eager to look brave, about a Hogwarts board that wants donors, and about Tom Riddle himself, now a powerful reformer, demonstrating that he can choreograph peril and keep it in a gilded cage. In this version, the goblet does not rebel. Harry's name comes out because it was placed there, carefully, legally, as part of a compromise Tom helps broker. The schools want older champions. The public wants someone young, someone new, someone who can stand as the face of a generation that never knew war. Harry Potter, son of Lily and James, is that symbol, not the boy who lived, the boy who might lead. Harry says yes because he feels the pull of it, the chance to prove himself on his own terms, not as a weapon. And we'll examine that tension when courage meets expectation, when a teenager's desire to matter collides with adults' hunger for a narrative. Hermione hates it, visibly, vocally. This isn't a story about her quietly supporting from the sidelines. She sees the ministry press releases, hears Tom's eloquent speeches about opportunity, and feels sick because underneath the rhetoric, she sees a boy she loves being turned into a slogan. She corners Harry in the library before the first task, parchment spread everywhere, spells and counter curses scribbled in her neat hand. She's helping him prepare. Of course she is. They're in this together. But every charm she drills, every contingency she outlines, is threaded with anger. Withdraw, she says for the third time. Tell them you won't be used like this, Harry. I agreed, he fires back. This is my choice. For once, it's actually my choice. The argument spirals. It's about dragons and contracts on the surface, but underneath, it's about fear. Her fear of losing him in some arena built for applause. His fear that if he steps back, he'll always be the protected child, never the equal partner. I can't watch them risk you like this, Hermione says finally, voice breaking in the quiet aisle. Not after everything, not when we finally have a world that isn't on fire. He's closer to her than he realizes, breathing hard, the air between them charged. And I can't spend my life hiding from danger just because you're afraid of losing me. Of course I'm afraid of losing you, she whispers, and there it is, the line blurring, friendship fraying into something more profound, not a grand confession, not yet, but a raw, unguarded truth that leaves them both shaken. They don't resolve it. They walk back to the common room side by side, hands brushing, but not quite holding, the bond between them stretched tight by love and disagreement. And then Tom asks to see Harry, in his office, polished wood, carefully chosen books, no trace of the boy who once prowled orphanage corridors. Tom offers tea, offers warmth, offers understanding. He talks about pressure, about greatness, about how extraordinary magic is rarely safe. He tells Harry that some risks are worth taking, that history remembers those who step forward, not those who step back. Most importantly, he does it gently, persuasively, as if he's the only adult who truly believes Harry can be extraordinary. Miss Granger is right to worry, Tom says, almost kindly, but she doesn't feel what you feel, does she? That pull towards something worth fighting for. Harry leaves with his nerves steadier, his resolve hardened, and a new, dangerous question echoing between him and Hermione. Whose vision of his future will he follow? Because in a world without open war, the real battle for Harry's soul might be fought not with curses, but with advice. Graveyard replaced, a different kind of betrayal. The chamber is not a graveyard of bones and fog this time. It's a polished, echoing conference room deep in the ministry, the air heavy with parchment, prophecy, and something colder than any tomb, quiet calculation. Harry is still damp from the maze, still shaking, when the cheering dissolves into confusion, and he's swept away, not by a port key, but by officials with tight smiles. Bagman babbles, crouches conspicuously absent, and then, behind a single oak door, the noise of the tournament fades. Waiting inside are Amelia Bones, a cluster of senior witches and wizards, and at the head of the table, perfectly composed, is Tom. What if, instead of a skeletal Dark Lord rising from a cauldron, Harry's reward for survival is an invitation, not to die, but to decide. Not in a graveyard, but in a boardroom. Tom rises, every inch the reformed prodigy, the ministry's golden architect of a safer world. He praises Harry's courage, his ingenuity, the way he and Hermione work together under pressure. We're exploring a different kind of revelation here, not wands drawn, but files opened. Tom slides a folder across the table, charts of Hogwarts performance, psychological profiles, even notes on Harry's Patronus, his loyalty, his instinct to save others first. The tournament, Tom calmly explains, has always had layers. In canon, it becomes a trap. Here, it's a sieve. A way to identify those rare witches and wizards who can lead, who can inspire, who can sell a vision. He speaks of reform, of ending the orphanages that made him, of regulating dangerous magic instead of driving it underground. And then he says the thing that freezes Harry more than any curse. I think, Tom murmurs, that you could be the hero this world rallies behind, publicly, with me at your side. This isn't a story about recruiting Death Eaters. This is a story about recruiting symbols. Tom doesn't offer skull masks or secret marks. He offers press conferences, Order of Merlin medals, and a carefully managed future where Harry's name is always linked with progress. Power, protection, and most importantly, a promise. The Weasleys safe, Hermione protected, Sirius cleared, all wrapped in the language of policy and peace. Harry hears the temptation under the polish. Safety, greatness, a chance to fix everything, if he'll let Tom frame his victories, temper his outrage, moderate his ideals, if he'll let their connection become leverage. He thinks of Hermione, of late-night arguments about truth and compromise, about how love without honesty rots. He feels, with a cold shock, that this is only a subtler version of the same offer a Dark Lord would make. Different robes, same bargain. So he doesn't shout, he doesn't duel. He smiles, deflects, buys time with the awkwardness of a 14-year-old who needs to think. He walks out under a haze of congratulations, hand eventually finding Hermione's, both of them shaken by what almost happened, because now they finally understand. The real fight won't be in hidden graveyards. It will be in hearts, in headlines, in who tells the story of Harry Potter and Tom Riddle. And as the Prophet's first flattering article about their extraordinary partnership hits the stands the next morning, we'll examine one terrifying question. What if the world falls in love with Tom's version first? Analysis. Break, evil without war? Is Tom still a villain? So what if the world does fall in love with Tom's version first? What if the boy who never became Voldemort ends up as the polished, brilliant face of progress, while the real danger works quietly, politely, under everyone's skin? Because in this timeline, Tom isn't unleashing giants. He's rewriting curriculum, he's centralizing ministry oversight for safety, he's publishing elegant papers on magical inheritance that just happen to keep Muggleborns on the margins. No murders on the front page, no dark mark in the sky, just 1,000 tiny policies that always tilt power upward, toward him, toward the old families who applaud his vision. So we're exploring a different kind of evil, the kind that smiles, the kind that thanks you for your input and then files it away forever. Tom mentors promising students from Wool's orphanage, but only the ones who learn to admire him. He promotes half-bloods into mid-level positions, then quietly blocks them from the rooms where laws are actually written. He never raises his wand in public rage, yet he normalizes a culture where casual slurs in the atrium go unpunished and jokes about Squibs land like hexes. Does evil have to be spectacular to deserve resistance? Or is there something more profound about saying no to the slow, ordinary cruelty everyone else has learned to accept? For Harry and Hermione, that's the moral trap. They can't just defeat Tom. There is no prophecy, no Horcrux hunt, no clean battlefield where courage is a single, blazing moment. This isn't a story about a destined duel. This is a story about out-arguing him in Wiesengamot hearings, out-organizing him in the alleys behind Flourish and Blots, out-loving him in every classroom where a scared 11-year-old wonders if they belong. And the world, inconveniently, sees Tom as a hero. He modernizes orphanage funding. He reforms Azkaban on paper. He visits Hogwarts and leaves first years starstruck. Respectability becomes his shield. His impeccable robes, his careful charm, his real contributions to magical theory make people feel that any criticism must be hysterical, ungrateful, radical. How do you convince your classmates that the man who just improved their potion syllabus is also quietly tightening a noose? Most importantly, what does that do to Harry's sense of self? Without the boy who lived, without a scar that means destiny, his choice to oppose Tom is purely ethical. He isn't surviving a war, he is starting one. Of ideas, of narratives, of love. His courage is not about living through the night. It is about waking up every morning and deciding again to stand against someone almost everyone else applauds. And Hermione is the axis of that decision. Her research exposes the fine print in Tom's policies. Her compassion refuses to write off the children who benefit from his programs, even as they're shaped by his ideology. Harry's love for her, their bond as partners, becomes his compass. When the world says, "Tom gave us order," Hermione asks, "At whose expense?" And Harry listens. When the Prophet praises another of Tom's reforms, they stay up late, together, tracing the invisible casualties. So what does it mean to be a chosen one when you're the one doing the choosing? When the only prophecy is the quiet promise you make to the person you love most, that you will not look away, that you will not let comfort excuse cruelty, that you will fight for something worth fighting for, even when no one writes songs about it. As Tom's influence deepens and the applause grows louder, the next question becomes inescapable. How do Harry and Hermione turn private conviction into public rebellion without becoming the villains in Tom Riddle's beautifully written story? Year 5. Dumbledore's Army without Umbridge. So what happens when conviction stops being private? When the quiet promise in a hospital wing hardens into a plan in a castle that now belongs, politely and impeccably, to Tom Riddle. Without Umbridge, the 5th year at Hogwarts doesn't erupt in pink tyranny. It cools into something more elegant and, in some ways, more terrifying. Tom doesn't ban defense against the dark arts. He refines it. He visits lessons, asks charming questions, and suggests, ever so reasonably, that perhaps students should understand the theory behind soul magic, behind binding oaths, behind unforgivable curses, even if they never cast them. After all, how can a society regulate what it refuses to name? On parchment, it looks enlightened. In practice, it is an invitation. A softening of the edges of dark magic, a slow normalization of the idea that power, if well administered, is the highest form of mercy. Detentions become practicums in discipline. Prefects are quietly encouraged to log minor infractions, to treat order as virtue and dissent as pathology. This isn't a story about a toad in lace doilies. This is a story about a beautiful argument that makes obedience feel like wisdom. Harry and Hermione see it first in the margins. A new essay prompt asking them to defend the use of memory charms on socially disruptive individuals. A guest lecture where Tom praises Lily Potter's spellcraft and, in the same breath, wonders whether some rights should be earned through demonstrated loyalty. What if the curriculum itself became the battlefield? So there Dumbledore's army is born not in reaction to ministry denial, but in response to Tom's dangerous clarity. They do not gather to train soldiers. They gather to train thinkers. In a disused classroom, behind layers of Hermione's concealment charms and Harry's tripwire hexes, they build something more profound, a student-driven resistance that teaches critical thinking, defensive magic, and the courage to say no. In one meeting, the air is thick with candle smoke and argument. Hermione stands at the front, chalk dust on her fingers, a diagram of a soul split into fragments sketched on the board, not Horcruxes by name, but close enough to make Harry's skin crawl. She asks calmly what a state is allowed to do to protect itself. Can it imprison without trial, rewrite memories, extract secrets from a mind that refuses to yield? Hands shoot up, voices clash, and we're exploring the ethics that canon usually leaves in the shadows. Then, Harry steps forward. While Hermione interrogates ideas, he grounds them in instinct. He demonstrates shields that flex instead of shatter, disarming spells modified to protect bystanders, counter curses that free rather than humiliate, mind and heart, theory and practice. They move around each other with the ease of people who have almost died together more than once, their bond visible in every exchanged glance, every unfinished sentence the other completes. And in the spaces between strategy and spellwork, something else grows. They stay after meetings, parchment spread between them, shoulders almost touching as they map which professors can be trusted and which cannot. Their hands brush as they reach for the same quill, neither pulls away quite fast enough. Arguments about tactics, Hermione's caution against Harry's instinct to confront Tom directly, flare hot, then cool into apologies that linger a beat too long. There is a moment when Harry says, "I can't do this without you," and Hermione looks at him like she already knows, like she has always known. Pattern interrupt. What if the enemy you're organizing against doesn't try to crush you, but to recruit you? One night, as the DA disperses in 2s and 3s, a nervous Ravenclaw lingers. She waits until it's just Harry, Hermione, and the fading candles. Her voice shakes as she admits she overheard 2 professors in the staff room. Tom has heard rumors of their little society. He is not outraged. He is intrigued. He called them, she says, a promising experiment in emergent leadership. A threat, yes, but also an opportunity. For what? That, of course, is the question that will define the rest of the year. Because most importantly, resistance has been noticed. And Tom Riddle does not ignore potential. He cultivates it, together, or against itself. The office confrontation, Harry, Hermione, and Tom's offer. So when the summons comes, it feels less like detention, and more like being invited to step onto a different kind of battlefield. Tom Riddle's office is everything Umbridge's was not. No lace, no kittens, elegantly austere. Shelves of rare books climb the walls, leather and vellum breathing quiet secrets. A single fire hisses in the grate, not roaring, just present, like a serpent at rest. The air hums with a sense of coiled power as Harry and Hermione step inside together, shoulder to shoulder, the door closing behind them with a soft, definitive click. He doesn't make them wait. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger. His voice is silk over steel. Please, sit. We're exploring what happens when the most dangerous mind in the castle decides not to crush resistance, but to court it. He gestures to 2 chairs before his desk, not opposite each other, but side by side. A tiny detail, an experiment. I've heard fascinating reports about your defense association, Tom begins, steepling his fingers. Student-led. highly effective, voluntary, yet remarkably disciplined. His eyes gleam. In canon, such unauthorized initiatives tend to be stamped out, but what if instead we recognize them as proof of leadership? He praises them, but it's not flattery, it's assessment. You have created something from nothing. You inspire loyalty. You shape how your peers think about power, about fear, about each other. That is how the wizarding world is actually changed, not by decrees, but by those who can lead. Then he leans forward. Imagine what you could do, he says softly, if you were working with the headmaster rather than against him. Harry bristles. Of course he does. We're not working against you, he says, jaw tight. We're just teaching ourselves what the ministry won't. Tom's gaze flicks to their joined hands on the chair arm. Harry hadn't noticed they'd drifted together. Tom had. Trust, he murmurs, is a rare commodity. Rarer still at your age. Your bond is remarkable. A beat. And, as history shows us, love is often a lever your enemies will not hesitate to pull. This isn't a story about a cartoon villain threatening the hero's girlfriend. This is a story about a man who has studied Wool's Orphanage and Grindelwald and every bloody war report in the Ministry archives, and who knows exactly how attachments are weaponized. Hermione's chin lifts. Or, she says, voice cool but shaking just a little, it can be a strength. You yourself argue, in your article on emergent leadership, that cohesive bonds increase resilience under pressure. His eyes sharpen. She's read his work. All of it. We'll examine that claim another time, Tom replies. For tonight, understand this. The world is not kind to those who love too fiercely. It punishes what it cannot control. His gaze pins them, one and then the other. I would hate to see either of you forced to learn that lesson the hard way. The fire hisses louder. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimes. And as they leave his office together, not yet realizing it, a line has been drawn, not just around the DA, but around their love itself. The only question now is who will cross it first. The kiss in the library, choosing each other. First, the library is almost empty. 0001. 0001. The castle hushed around it, as if even Hogwarts is holding its breath after Tom Riddle's warning. Candle stubs gutter on the tables. Books lean in shadowed towers. And in the far corner, where they always end up when the world feels too loud, Harry and Hermione sit facing each other, with an entire future they don't know how to name between them. What if this is the real battleground, we realize? Not Dumbledore's office, not the DA room, but this narrow strip of wood between their hands. Hermione talks first, because of course she does. Her words come in a rush, low and shaking, every worst-case scenario she has ever trained herself to anticipate spilling out. Tom targeting their parents, the DA splintering into factions, their names dragged through the Prophet as manipulative children playing politics with a reformed dark wizard. She imagines the ministry using Harry's scar as propaganda, imagines Tom charming every board member until it looks like they're the unstable ones, imagines their love, she doesn't say the word, not yet, twisted into a narrative of teenage hysteria. And we're exploring something more profound here, because this isn't a story about an overreacting Hermione. This is a story about a girl who has read too much history not to know how quickly ideals are weaponized. Harry lets her talk. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't argue, just watches the way her fingers worry the edge of a parchment until the ink smudges, the way her voice keeps catching on the word family. When he finally speaks, it isn't to reassure her that Tom is wrong, or that Dumbledore will fix it, or that canon heroes always win. He swallows, stares at the ring of melted wax between them, and says, "I'm scared too." Half sentences, 215, 215, broken starts. I'm scared of him, obviously, and of the DA, and of choosing wrong, and of what happens if we back Dumbledore and he's not right, but mostly, he stops because the air feels thick, because she is looking at him like the answer might break her. Mostly, I'm scared of losing you. He tries to back away from it. Calls it distraction, calls it bad timing, calls it something that should wait until after exams, after the next meeting, after anything. But the truth keeps pushing through the cracks, that she isn't a side quest in this war of ideas. She is the axis his world spins on. I love you, he says finally, and it isn't grand or rehearsed, it's raw. Not as a way to forget all this, as the one thing that actually makes it worth fighting. Hermione moves before she has fully decided to. One heartbeat she is staring, the next her chair scrapes, her hand is on his cheek, and she is kissing him, clumsy and desperate and unbelievably gentle all at once. There is the taste of ink on her fingers where they brush his lips, the faint grit of parchment dust, the way Harry's hand finds the back of her neck like it has always belonged there. They break apart with a shaky laugh that is half terror, half relief. The library swims back into focus, the distant rustle of pages, the soft hoot of an owl outside. "So that's decided then," Hermione whispers, and now she can say it. "We don't let anyone use this. Not Tom, not the DA, not the Ministry, not even each other. Most importantly, they promise quietly that their love will not become a weapon, not a bargaining chip, not a symbol to be paraded, just a bond they choose, again and again, no matter whose line they have to cross." And as they leave the library together, we can't help but ask, when the next move comes, what if that choice is exactly what Tom Riddle never learned to make? Pattern interrupt, Snape's unexpected role in this War of Hearts. And that, right there in the corridor outside the library, is where the camera should pull back, because while Harry and Hermione are vowing that their love will not be weaponized, someone else at Hogwarts has already turned his wounds into armor. Someone who, in this world, never took the dark mark, but never truly healed either. Severus Snape's life, without Death Eaters to join, does not become soft. It becomes narrow, focused. He is still the Half-Blood Prince, still brilliant, still dangerous, but instead of vanishing into Voldemort's ranks, he takes the path Dumbledore always hoped he would: potions master, researcher, a man buried in cauldrons and journals rather than in war. And yet, he's respected more than he is liked, feared more than he is loved. What changed? Not his bitterness, only its target. Without a Dark Lord to worship, Snape's resentment curls inward and sideways. He watches Tom Riddle, charismatic, reformist, dazzling in debate, dominate the intellectual and political landscape, and it stings. Here is the genius Snape knows he could have been, if the world had ever believed in a poor boy from Spinner's End. Here is the man Lily Evans chose to support, publicly, passionately, with speeches and votes and late-night strategy sessions that never include Severus. This isn't a story about Snape redeemed by heroism. This is a story about a man who did not become a monster, but also did not become free. So when Harry Potter walks into his classroom, messy-haired and unbearably James-like, Snape's reaction is complicated. He still sees the boy who has everything he never did: family, safety, effortless popularity. He still snaps, still belittles, still takes points with petty satisfaction, but without the trauma of Lily's death, without the canon horror of a murdered friend and a shattered promise, he cannot actually hate Harry in the same feral way. The cruelty is smaller, more human, less vicious. A cutting remark instead of a calculated attempt to break a child, detentions that sting but do not scar. And in quiet moments, when Harry's questions about Tom's ideology echo Lily's old doubts, something in Snape twists in recognition. The real pattern interrupt, though, is Hermione Granger. Snape sees her answer questions Tom once asked, solve problems Tom once solved, and he realizes, with a chill, that this Muggle-born girl might actually rival Riddle's intellect, that she might exceed his own. She is methodical where Harry is instinctive, relentless where others give up. He marks her essays with more red ink than they deserve, not because they're poor, but because they are too good. We're exploring a version of Snape who is intrigued and threatened all at once. He recognizes in Hermione the same hunger for mastery, the same refusal to accept impossible as an answer. It unsettles him. It also forces him to respect her, grudgingly, prickly, in the way he once respected Lily. He assigns her extra reading on obscure branches of magic, pretends it's a punishment, and then waits, almost anxiously, to see what she does with it. And this is where he becomes an unlikely ally. Snape has spent years cataloging dangerous magic, not to use it in service of a Dark Lord, but to understand it, to control it, to make sure no one else repeats the mistakes he nearly made. He reads Tom Riddle's speeches, and footnotes them in the margins, with scathing, brilliant criticism. He hears whispers of experimental rituals, and quietly traces them back to their theoretical roots. So when Harry and Hermione finally realize that Tom's ideological project is not just politics, but a reordering of magical power itself, where do they turn? To the man who hates Riddle's charisma, envies his influence, and yet understands his methods better than almost anyone alive. If they can learn to trust him, if he can bear to help the child of James and the echo of Lily, Snape becomes a source of testimony as much as technique. Most importantly, his presence widens the battlefield. This coming confrontation with Tom will not only be about whose spell hits first, it will be about who can tell the truest story, about blood, about love, about what magic is for. We'll examine how a bitter professor, a boy who should have been ordinary, and a girl who refuses to be anything less than extraordinary might, together, turn truth itself into something worth fighting for. Year 6. Temptation, Choice, and the Edge of Darkness. So what happens when truth itself starts losing? When Tom Riddle, polished and patient, begins rewriting the rules while everyone is still arguing over the story. In this 6th year, we're exploring the moment where resistance stops being theoretical and becomes a choice that can actually break you. Tom moves first. Of course he does. As the Ministry's rising star and Hogwarts' most illustrious alumnus, he couches everything in safety and tradition. New regulations on dangerous, destabilizing branches of magic, extra oversight on advanced charms, experimental transfiguration, soul-adjacent research. On parchment, it sounds reasonable. In practice, it means certain families, old, approved, impeccably pure, or respectably half-blood, keep their full curriculum. Others find doors quietly closing, scholarships vanish, apprenticeships are re-evaluated, and the people who question it, Dumbledore loses committees. Lily finds her proposals buried in sub-departments that never meet. When she speaks too sharply in a Wizengamot session, Tom only smiles, regretful, and talks about passion needing structure. This isn't a story about open tyranny, this is a story about a velvet glove tightening around the same old fist. Harry and Hermione feel it first as absence, certain books disappearing from the restricted section, old case files sealed, a jitter of fear in conversations that used to be frank. Then, they stumble on something more concrete, a misfiled box in the Hogwarts archives, correspondence between a much younger Tom Riddle and the Department of Mysteries. Not Horcruxes, not yet, but proposals about separating consciousness from the body, about anchoring identity through ritualized division. Hermione reads in silence, lips pressed thin. Harry watches the color drain from her face. These aren't the ravings of Voldemort as we know him in canon. These are elegant, meticulous, peer-reviewed horrors. What if the line between this Tom and the Dark Lord was never a chasm, but a single choice he once, just barely, did not make? That question follows them back to the Room of Requirement, where their resistance has been planning leaflets and quiet counterspells. It explodes into their first truly vicious fight. Harry wants to go public. Now, leak the letters, accuse Tom of soul magic, force the wizarding world to look. And when he denies it, Hermione demands, voice shaking, when we can't prove what was actually done, you'll hand him the perfect story, persecuted reformer, brave enough to ask forbidden questions. So we do nothing? Harry fires back. Wait until he's carved up enough of the law that no one can even say his name without permission. It's not just strategy, it's fear. He's terrified of losing her to this slow, choking war. She's terrified of losing him to reckless heroics. Their bond, which has always been about moving in perfect tandem, when chaos meets logic, when courage meets brilliance, suddenly feels misaligned. I need you to trust me, Hermione says, softer now. Not because you love me, because I'm right about how people work. I do trust you, he answers, and it's true, and it hurts. But I can't watch him turn the world into a lie and stay quiet. They stand there, too close, breathing hard, neither willing to step back, and then the pattern breaks. Hermione's hand finds his, fingers trembling, and instead of another argument, there is a long, raw silence, where they both remember what this has always been about, not just winning, protecting each other long enough to make winning mean something. Most importantly, they realize they don't have the whole story. Those letters reference a collaborator, someone who challenged Tom's early work from inside Slytherin, someone who walked away. A name they recognize, Severus Snape. He is the last person Harry wants to trust, and the last person Hermione wants to need. But if Snape can confirm what Tom once intended, and why he stopped, then the narrative shifts. This could turn admiration into doubt, doubt into fear. So they make their next choice, together, not to burn everything down, not to back away, to walk, hand in hand, to the dungeon door of a man who hates being indebted to anyone, and ask him to help them rewrite the story before Tom finishes writing his. Because if Tom Riddle is standing on the edge of darkness, then so are they. And the question now is simple and terrifying. How close are they willing to walk to that edge to pull him and their world back? The pensive of almost Voldemort, Snape's revelations. Snape's door slammed behind them with a soft, final click, and for a moment, the dungeon felt too small for the three of them, and the question hanging in the air, what if the only man who had seen Tom Riddle clearly from the beginning was also the one who least wanted to talk about him? Snape didn't invite them to sit. He swept past, black robes cutting the air, and drew his wand along the stone basin waiting on his desk. Silvery strands, coiled and shadowed, stirred like something alive. "You asked," he said, voice low, "how close he came. You will not like the answer. We're exploring a pensive not of a Dark Lord, but of an almost Voldemort, of a boy who could have broken either way." The first memory drags them under, the second-floor girl's bathroom, the hiss of parcel tongue like steam. Tom, 16, hand on the sink, the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets yawning open. In canon, this is where the monster steps through. Here, it's where he stops. They watch him stare into the darkness, jaw tight, wand clenched. Then there's a flicker, Dumbledore's voice from an earlier conversation, pressing on his conscience, naming what he is doing as a choice, not destiny. Tom's hand shakes. He shuts the chamber, breath ragged, and walks away. No dead girl, no Hagrid framed. Just a boy who almost crossed a line, and this time, didn't. Snape changes the memory with a precise twist. Slughorn's office now. Green lamplight, crystal bottle, Tom leaning forward with that polite, hungry interest. "Sir, what about Horcruxes?" In canon, the room curdles. Here, Slughorn has already spoken to Dumbledore, already seen the pattern. He doesn't flinch or lie. He launches into a brutal lecture on the mutilation of the soul, on Grindelwald, on the way love is the only magic that can put someone back together. Tom's eyes flash, rage, humiliation, but also something more fragile, doubt. We'll examine that doubt later, but in this moment, you can feel the axis of history tilt by a fraction. Memory after memory, Dumbledore appearing in corridors where Tom lingers too long near the restricted section, quiet conversations about power and loneliness, a hand on his shoulder when he receives yet another award, and looks, for a heartbeat, genuinely lost. This isn't a story about easy redemption. This is a story about relentless, inconvenient care, refusing to let him fall without being seen. But Snape does not spare them the shadows. Between the altered scenes, jagged flashes, Tom's face cold as he pockets a stolen trinket, the way he watches weaker students, calculating, the fierce private disgust when someone mentions his muggle father. In another world, with slightly less intervention, those moments don't soften, they sharpen into the cruelty history remembers. Harry's fingers dig into the pensive's rim. Hermione's breath stutters beside him. They're realizing, with a kind of horror, that the line between this quiet, precarious world and canon is not a chasm, it's a thread. A few words here, a missing conversation there, and everything burns. Most importantly, they understand something else. Even without a Dark Lord, ideology doesn't vanish. Tom is still brilliant, still charismatic. His ideas about blood and order could still harden, quietly, into something worth fighting for. They surface, gasping. Snape's eyes are unreadable, but his voice is not. If you intend to drag these truths into the light, he says, be prepared. People prefer their heroes unblemished. They do not like to believe they were almost monsters. His gaze moves from Harry to Hermione, sharp as a curse. Expose him, and you will not only make an enemy of Riddle, a beat. You may make an enemy of the world that chose to look away. And before they can ask what he means, he draws his wand again, as if ready to show them one last memory, the one no one has ever seen. Year 7. War without wands. Building a case against Tom. The memory never comes. Dumbledore's wand lowers instead, and that non-choice becomes the quiet line between 6th year and something entirely new. What if, he seems to decide in that moment, the final battle isn't a duel at all, but a trial? So when 7th year begins, there are no cursed lockets, no camping in forests, no prophecy hanging over Harry's head. There is, instead, a different kind of war, a war without wands, a campaign of parchment and pensive vials, and whispered interviews in shadowed corridors. This isn't a story about running from Tom Riddle, this is a story about turning around to face him with receipts. Harry and Hermione spend that last year not hunting Horcruxes, but hunting history. They request access to Ministry archives under Dumbledore's quiet sponsorship, paging through Wool's orphanage reports, disciplinary notes, and adoption ledgers that never bore Tom's name. They sit in Slughorn's office, while he, sweating slightly, finally admits the conversation where a brilliant boy asked about splitting a soul, and how close that question came to action before Dumbledore intervened. We're exploring a Hogwarts where the trio's late-night adventures aren't about secret missions for the Order, but about tracking down people who knew Tom before the titles. A former matron from the orphanage, coaxed to Hogsmeade for tea, an elderly plumber who remembers that odd boy, and a flood the year the chamber first opened, a muggle-born healer who can quietly testify how Riddle's reforms are actually pricing poor families out of magical healthcare. Dumbledore curates the memories. Lily, with her muggle-born perspective and her own history of standing up to pure-blood arrogance, helps Hermione translate policy into impact, who loses their job when bloodline registries expand, who quietly disappears when Riddle's security measures tighten. Snape, brittle and brilliant, traces the theoretical path from curiosity about immortality to near Horcrux research, annotating it in a cramped, furious hand. Here's where I could have gone too. And Slughorn, he becomes their reluctant confessor, helping them build a dossier that shows the full arc: the lonely child, the charming prefect, the boy who opened the chamber and framed Hagrid, the reformer whose laws always, somehow, leave Muggleborns and half-bloods just a little more afraid. The cost is constant. Harry and Hermione are exhausted, always planning the next interview, the next angle, the next way to make people care. Their dates become strategy sessions in empty classrooms, hands entwined over parchment covered in names and timelines. They argue over risk, Harry wanting to confront Tom directly, Hermione insisting they need more proof first. Voices rise, eyes shine, but the bond doesn't break. In the silence after each fight, they always reach for each other, as if to say, "You are my anchor in this." Then, the poll drops. The Daily Prophet runs a public confidence survey on Minister Riddle. 81% approval, headlines praising stability, prosperity, vision. A sidebar dismisses alarmist fringe voices, questioning his past. One photograph shows Tom smiling beside a new Muggle-born scholarship recipient. Harry stares at the page until the ink blurs. "Does any of this matter?" he asks, voice raw. "If they've already decided?" Hermione folds the paper with shaking hands. "It has to," she says, but for the first time, it sounds like a wish instead of a certainty. Their love feels suddenly very small, a single candle in a hall of enchanted, admiring portraits of Tom Riddle. Most importantly, this moment of doubt doesn't end them, it clarifies them. If the world won't come to the truth, they will bring the truth to the world. So they make a decision. No more whispers, no more private files. They will force a public reckoning at Hogwarts itself, on the one stage Tom can't fully script, in the one place his legend is most carefully curated, using the only weapon he cannot disarm with a smile or a speech, the unvarnished truth of his own past. And as they begin to plan that confrontation, we'll examine what happens when love, evidence, and memory collide with a myth that almost everyone wants to believe. The Great Hall Trial, confronting Tom in front of everyone. The Great Hall is transformed. The house tables have vanished, replaced by concentric arcs of benches and hovering quills, the enchanted ceiling mirroring not a storm or a sunset, but a restless, roiling gray. Cameras from the wizarding press float beside ministry seals. Students pack the upper rows, whispering. Professors sit in a stern semicircle, and at the center, where the staff table once stood, Dumbledore has raised a simple wooden platform, more courtroom than castle. This isn't a duel, this isn't a story about wands drawn and spells shouted. This is a story about what happens when a myth is forced to answer questions. Dumbledore's voice carries, amplified without visible magic. He frames it as an inquiry, an examination of conduct and ideology, not a trial. Because what if you admit, from the first moment, that the real danger isn't one crime, but a pattern of belief? We're exploring Tom Riddle, not as the Dark Lord he never became, but as the brilliant, unsettling professor who might yet reshape their world. Harry and Hermione stand together at one lectern. Tom stands at the other, immaculate in black, expression politely attentive, eyes bright with that familiar, unnerving interest. Between them, a pensive shimmers in mid-air, like a suspended moon. Hermione begins. Calm, precise, parchment stacked, citations ready. With a tap of her wand, memory spills into the air. Wool's orphanage in washed-out gray, the thin boy in hand-me-downs making toys fly, punishing other children in silent, secret ways. Mrs. Cole, older now, sits on the front bench, hands twisting in her lap as she confirms the coldness, the control, the way Tom always needed to win. Then Slughorn's memory, a younger Tom in Slytherin robes, all charm and curiosity, asking about magic that splits the soul. The hall flinches at the word Horcrux. Even in this timeline, where the atrocities never happened, Slughorn's voice shakes as he admits he was flattered, that he ignored the chill in his own spine. Snape's testimony is quieter, knife-like. He speaks of lesson plans, adjusted by Tom, of defensive magic that edges toward preemptive cruelty, of students encouraged to see fear as weakness rather than a warning. He doesn't condemn, he simply describes, and that somehow is worse. Most importantly, the case they present is layered. They acknowledge Tom's reforms, his brilliance, the way he has actually reduced certain abuses at the ministry. They show the good alongside the dangerous, because love of truth demands the whole picture, not a caricature. Then Tom speaks. He doesn't rant. He reasons. He accepts youthful arrogance at the orphanage, overzealous inquiry with Slughorn, over corrections in his curriculum. He reframes each choice as necessary in a world that has always teetered on the edge of chaos. Do they really want to return to the days when blood purists plotted in shadows? When children like him were left in places like wolves, unprotected and unseen? He talks about order, about safety, about strength. He talks about fear like an old acquaintance he has learned to master. And the terrifying thing is how many people nod. Then Harry steps forward, and the air changes. He doesn't speak as the chosen one, because in this world, he never was. He speaks as a student who loved and feared his teacher at the same time. He remembers late-night conversations in Tom's office, the thrill of being understood, the way Tom made him feel extraordinary and small in the same moment. "You taught me to look at the world without illusions," Harry says, voice rough. "But you never taught me what to do with the people inside it, only how to control them." Hermione follows, and her words cut cleaner than any curse. Brilliance without empathy, she argues, is simply a sharper knife. She reminds the hall that charisma and logic can justify anything if there is no anchor in human connection, no willingness to be vulnerable, to be wrong. "You always ask us to be strong," she says to Tom. "You never ask us to be kind." The great hall buzzes, split almost down the middle between awe and unease. There is no verdict yet, only tension, only questions. And on the platform, Tom Riddle looks at Harry and Hermione with fury, with sorrow, and with something like pride that they have finally become strong enough to stand against him. The inquiry is adjourned for the day, the benches scrape, the ceiling flickers, and as the doors swing open and the crowd surges out, Tom's gaze lingers on them a moment too long, as if he is already planning the one conversation that will never make it into any official record. No killing curse, no hallows, a different kind of victory. The next morning, the hall is not full of whispers, it is full of verdicts. No elder wand waits, humming with borrowed destiny. No deathly hallows align in some grand, sacrificial pattern. There is no walk into the forest, no green flash, no mother's love as a shield against the killing curse, because in this timeline, that curse never became Tom Riddle's native language. Instead, everything comes down to something much less cinematic and much more terrifying. Are enough people finally willing to see Tom clearly and act accordingly? This isn't a story about a boy walking alone to die. This is a story about a room full of adults deciding whether accountability is actually something worth fighting for. We're exploring a different climax, where wands are drawn, but not to kill, where the question is not, can Harry's blood magic outwit Voldemort's, but will the world stop mistaking brilliance for benevolence? Dumbledore does not stand as an omniscient savior. He sits as a witness to his own failures. McGonagall, Amelia Bones, even former classmates who remember Tom as head boy, all speak. They recall Wool's orphanage, the lonely prodigy who used magic to control. They recall the charming prefect who opened the chamber and let Hagrid take the fall. In the end, the verdict is clinical and almost cruel in its mundanity. Tom is stripped of every position. No more advisory role at the ministry, no more influence on curriculum, no more quiet steering of policy from the shadows. His research is formally restricted. Entire branches of his work on the soul, on binding and blood, are sealed away, accessible only under strict supervision. And then comes the choice that no canon Dark Lord ever receives: exile, under magical geas, or supervised work dedicated to undoing what he has already set in motion. The room holds its breath. For a moment, he looks like the boy in the orphanage again, cornered, feral. Then, the mask reforms. He accepts the latter, through clenched teeth, because exile would mean irrelevance, and that is the one fate he still cannot bear. He is furious, humiliated, but the real wound is quieter. Because as he looks at Harry and Hermione, these children he tried to shape into instruments, into proofs of his philosophy, he is confronted with a truth that feels like a personal defeat. They have reshaped him instead, not into a hero, not into a monster to be slain, but into something far less grand. A man who must live with the consequences of his almost evil day after ordinary day. Harry and Hermione have won, but it does not feel like victory in the way legends promise. There is no dead tyrant, no tidy moral. They have not destroyed a monster. They have exposed a man, and that is messier. It leaves questions. What if he changes? What if he doesn't? What if mercy today becomes regret tomorrow? Pattern interrupt. For a flicker of a moment, Harry wishes it were simpler. That he had just blasted Tom off a balcony and been done, but then Hermione's hand finds his, and he remembers this is the world they chose to fight for, one where love complicates justice instead of replacing it. When Tom finally rises, he does so under guard. The chains are symbolic, gleaming, unnecessary. He could not outduel the entire hall, and he knows it. He walks between Aurors toward the great doors, every eye tracking him, every whispered future rewriting itself in real time. At the threshold, he stops. He turns back, just once, gaze locking on Harry first, then Hermione. The silence stretches, tight as a drawn bowstring. "Love," he says softly, almost to himself. "It saves you. It ruins you. It makes you do extraordinary things you will always resent." His mouth twists, not quite a smile. Be careful what you build your world on. And then he is gone, the doors closing behind him with a final, echoing boom that sounds less like an ending and more like the beginning of a very different kind of war. Not against a Dark Lord, but against the shadows he left inside everyone who ever believed in him. Epilogue. Reconfigured 19 years later, without scars. 19 years later, King's Cross is still full of whispers, but they are different whispers than the ones we know from canon. No one is pointing at a fated lightning bolt. No one is asking where the Dark Lord fell. Instead, we're exploring a quieter question. What if the world really did change after that trial, not with a bang, but with a long, stubborn, ordinary peace? Harry stands on the platform, fingers laced with Hermione's. Their bond so easy now, it almost disappears into the crowd. This isn't a story about scars, it's a story about what grows where scars never formed. Their eldest, a girl with Hermione's eyes and Harry's stubborn chin, adjusts her prefect badge as the scarlet steam curls around her. Her name is Althea Morphin Potter Granger, for the matron who first wrote to Dumbledore about a strange, frightening boy in Wool's orphanage and asked for help instead of punishment. The middle child, Thomas Albus, scuffs his shoe on the platform edge, pretending not to care about first-year nerves. Yes, they named a son Tom. Is that forgiveness? Is it defiance? Or is it something more profound? A refusal to let one broken life define a name forever? Around them, the wizarding world looks almost ordinary, but if we look closer, we'll examine the seams. Muggle-born parents stand openly beside pure-blood grandparents, arguing cheerfully about platform safety charms. A ministry pamphlet on Muggle-wizard cooperation flutters from a bench, listing rights that did not exist before the Great Hall trial forced everyone to ask who should hold power and why. There are still arguments. Oh, there are always arguments about experimental magic, about oversight committees, about whether the Horcrux Accords are too strict or not strict enough. Yet those debates happen in courtrooms and classrooms, not in shadows. Harry works for the Office of Magical Mediation now, an Auror who traded in raids for round tables. He spends his days in cramped rooms above Diagon Alley shops, translating between frightened Muggle councils and prickly wizarding landowners, between old families and new laws. When negotiations stall, he remembers a boy in a courtroom who almost chose differently, and he pushes one more time for compromise. Hermione, meanwhile, strides through the ministry as head of magical law reform and visiting lecturer at Hogwarts, her schedule a battlefield of hearings, lectures, and late-night research. They are still partners in everything. When courage meets brilliance, when idealism meets hard-won realism, when two people who survived a different kind of war refuse to stop improving the peace. And Tom, officially, he does not exist. Unofficially, there are rumors. a reclusive scholar in a monitored wing of an old Transylvanian monastery. Dense, remorse-tinged treatises on magic and mortality, published under initials only, arguing that the soul is not a resource, but a relationship. Hermione reads everyone. Sometimes her hands shake with anger at the cruelty that still seeps through the footnotes. Sometimes her eyes sting with a gratitude she will never name aloud, because without that boy, without that trial, would any of these safeguards exist? Dad? Thomas tugs Harry's sleeve, breaking the moment. Pattern interrupt. In Mum's books, the man who almost broke the world, was he real? Harry and Hermione exchange a glance that holds years. Pain, hope, choice. Harry crouches so they're eye to eye. He was real, he says, and we learned from him. That's what matters. Most importantly, this isn't a story about defeating darkness once and for all. It's about building something worth fighting for every day. A world where their youngest, Lily Jean, can roll her eyes at her parents' hand-holding, where love can be ordinary, not just a weapon. The train whistles, steam billows, small hands squeeze larger ones, and as the Hogwarts Express pulls away, what remains on the platform is simple and extraordinary at once. A family, together, choosing, again and again, to live in a world they helped remake. Analysis. Would another Dark Lord have risen? But in a world they helped remake, we have to ask a harder question. If Tom Riddle never becomes Lord Voldemort, does the darkness simply go somewhere else? Because blood prejudice doesn't evaporate with one man's change of heart. The old pureblood families still whisper about sacred lineages over brandy, the ministry still has buried files, quiet bribes, and a culture that prefers comfort to confrontation. Magical inequality between pureblood and muggleborn, between wealthy and poor, between Britain and the wider wizarding world, doesn't vanish because one orphan in Wool's orphanage was finally seen and loved. It lingers. It always does. So what if this isn't a story about erasing evil, but redistributing it? Without a singular Dark Lord, power-hungry figures don't disappear, they fragment. A corrupt Department of Mysteries official quietly hoards illegal artifacts. A former Slytherin club rebrands as a heritage society and tests the limits of what they can say in public. A brilliant but reckless scholar in Bulgaria pushes into experimental soul magic, convinced that because he is not Riddle, he cannot be dangerous. None of them becomes a myth. None of them becomes a name children fear to say. And that, paradoxically, makes them easier to contain. There are Auror raids that never make the profit. There are Wizengamot hearings where Hermione, quill-poised, dismantles bigotry wrapped in legal language. There are late-night Patronus messages between Harry and international allies as they track a radicalized splinter group before it ever reaches Death Eater levels. We're exploring a world where darkness is smaller, more localized, more administrative than apocalyptic. Most importantly, Tom himself becomes a warning label. His partial redemption, then public fall, from promising reformer to disgraced academic whose flirtation with forbidden magic nearly costs lives, creates a narrative the wizarding world cannot ignore. Children grow up on a different kind of bedtime story, not he who must not be named, but the boy who almost lost himself. Teachers at Hogwarts reference Riddle's journals in Ethics of Magic. Dumbledore, older now, tells first years, "Power without love is a hollow wand," and everyone knows exactly whom he means. So when the next charismatic leader promises purity, or security, or easy answers, people flinch a little sooner. Journalists ask sharper questions. Backbench ministry clerks leak documents. Witches and wizards who once stayed out of politics remember Tom Riddle's face on the front page and think, not again. Harry and Hermione's generation grows up not in a war of wands, but in a war of ideas. They debate in common rooms about house elf rights and goblin autonomy. They intern at the ministry and push for transparency charms on key votes. Their bond, their love, becomes a model of partnership that fuses courage with conscience. When chaos meets logic, when trauma meets healing, when two people who've seen what almost happened refuse to let it repeat. Evil still exists, it always will, but here it is diffuse, challenged earlier, dragged into the light more often. This is a story about a world that is imperfect, unjust, sometimes frightening, but no longer poised on the edge of annihilation. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon of this quieter revolution, another question waits. If apocalypse is off the table, what does rebuilding look like when no one is holding a wand to your throat? Character check-in, Snape, Dumbledore, and the ones who changed course. If apocalypse is off the table, then we have to ask a quieter, more unnerving question. Who do these adults become when their lives are not defined by war? When no one is holding a wand to their throat, what if the real test is whether they can finally choose connection over control? Start with Dumbledore. In canon, he is brilliance wrapped around a hollow core of guilt. Ariana, Grindelwald, the prophecy, the boy he raised for slaughter. Here, Ariana's death still scars him, Grindelwald still happens, but the cycle breaks earlier. There is no prophecy binding Harry to Tom, no second Dark Lord to confirm Albus's worst fear, that power always corrupts. So when he meets an 11-year-old Tom Riddle in that Grey London orphanage, we're exploring a Dumbledore who is wary, yes, but also present. He visits more than once. He speaks to Mrs. Cole, to the other children. He does not only warn Tom against cruelty, he offers him somewhere to put his loneliness. That shift ripples forward. At Hogwarts, this Dumbledore does not simply observe a brilliant prefect and head boy, he mentors him. He challenges Tom's obsession with bloodlines in debate, pairs him with Muggleborns in advanced seminars, quietly blocks access to the darkest sections of the library. When he senses an echo of the Chamber of Secrets, he investigates, but instead of turning away in disappointment, he sits with Tom in his office and asks the dangerous question, what are you so afraid of losing that you would petrify children to protect it? And because there is no prophecy, there is no need to groom Harry as a weapon. With no Horcrux hunt on the horizon, Dumbledore can actually be a headmaster first and a strategist second. He is still secretive, still theatrical, but less manipulative, more willing to say to both Harry and Tom, you are not chess pieces, you are boys. Then there is Snape. Without Voldemort, he still grows up poor, bullied, steeped in bitterness. He still loves Lily with that fierce, unrequited ache, but he does not join Death Eaters, does not carry the unbearable knowledge that his choices led to her murder. His tragedy is smaller, and because of that, his growth is slower, stubborn, something more profound. He becomes a harsh, exacting professor who never quite forgives James, who never quite stops resenting Harry's face, but there are no unbreakable vows, no double life. Just a man who, over years of staff meetings and shared causes, grudgingly finds himself working alongside Lily on curriculum reform, alongside Tom on safer potions regulations, until one day he realizes he has allies he never meant to earn. Lily and James, alive, are not perfect parents preserved in martyrdom. They argue with Harry about his independence, about late-night meetings with Hermione in the library, about his refusal to join their preferred ministry faction. James bristles at Tom's influence on policy. Lily clashes with him over how fast to push Muggle protection laws, yet they all keep coming back to the same table. Love does not erase politics. It forces them to negotiate it. Even the minor figures matter. Slughorn, who in canon hands Tom the theory of Horcruxes, and then spends decades running from that memory, here does something smaller and braver. He notices a lonely boy's hunger for praise and answers it with real mentorship instead of flattery. The orphanage matron, prompted by Dumbledore's repeated visits, starts a simple ritual: birthday cakes, handwritten cards, a locked drawer for special treasures, that tells Tom his things will not always be stolen. They never see the full consequences of those choices. They do not watch the war that doesn't happen, but their care becomes the difference between a boy who believes love is weakness and a man who, quietly, chooses otherwise. This isn't a story about one man's redemption magically fixing everything. This is a story about a network of people who, again and again, reach for relationship instead of dominance, for conversation instead of curses. And if that's true, then the next question is almost frightening. In a world where everyone is still flawed, still afraid, what does it cost to keep choosing that kind of connection when it would be so much easier to fall back into control? Love as the true divergence, why Harry and Hermione matter. Here, it costs everything, and that's exactly why this is where the real divergence begins. Because in this timeline, the fulcrum isn't just Dumbledore choosing mentorship over suspicion, or Slughorn choosing confession over cowardice. The true break from Tom Riddle's path is emotional, the quiet, relentless presence of people who are willing to love dangerously and tell the truth even when it might shatter the peace they've built. This isn't a story about better institutions fixing everything. This is a story about ordinary people choosing an extraordinary kind of connection, over and over, when control would be easier, and no one embodies that more clearly than Harry and Hermione. Look at their bond in this softer world. From Patronus practice in 3rd year, that what-if moment where Harry feels despair pressing in, and it's Hermione's voice, Hermione's hand on his arm, that anchors him long enough to try again. In canon, that scene is about survival. Here, we're exploring how it becomes about intimacy. He lets her see his worst memories, his deepest fear of the Dementors, and instead of armoring up, they lean in. Vulnerability over control. Now contrast that with Tom at Wool's orphanage, hoarding secrets like treasures, using magic to punish instead of protect. When Dumbledore offers him Hogwarts, Tom hears power, not home. When Slughorn flatters him, Tom hears confirmation, not care. There are almost moments, visits back to the orphanage, conversations with professors, where love brushes his life but never quite lands, because he refuses to be seen as anything but perfect. Harry and Hermione do the opposite. At Dumbledore's army meetings, they build something together that Tom never allows, a space where power is shared, where mistakes are public and safe. Harry stumbles through teaching. Hermione over-prepares, and then admits when she's wrong. They model partnership instead of hierarchy in front of an entire generation. Most importantly, they let each other fail without withdrawing affection. Tom cannot imagine that. To him, love is conditional, a transaction that collapses the moment you show weakness. Think about the library kiss in this universe. Not as a reward after the war, but in the middle of it, surrounded by books on Horcrux theory and obscure soul magic. They're exhausted, terrified, arguing about whether there's a non-lethal way to neutralize what remains of Tom's fractured legacy. And then Harry says, "I don't want to just win. I want us to live with what we've done." That's the engine. Their love doesn't arrive after they save the world. It powers the decision to save it in this specific, less violent way. In the Great Hall trial, when a shaken, aging Tom Riddle faces the consequences of what he almost became, it's their shared choice to speak to him, not at him, that completes the divergence. Hermione refuses to dehumanize him, Harry refuses to excuse him. Together, they offer accountability without annihilation, partnership over punishment, growth over perfection. And that's the final parallel, where love almost reached Tom and was rejected. It reaches Harry and Hermione, and is finally fully received. Their relationship is not a consolation prize for a world without Voldemort. It is the living proof that such a world was something worth fighting for in the first place. But if love is the divergence and the proof, then we have to ask one more dangerous question. What happens when that very love is the thing that the new world begins to fear? Canon versus what if, what we lose and what we gain. When the world begins to fear the very love that saved it, we hit the real fault line between canon and this what if. Because without Voldemort, without a Dark Lord to focus all our terror and hope upon, the story loses that stark, almost mythic clarity. Good on one side, evil on the other, Harry's scar the lightning bolt that splits the sky. In canon, we always know the axis of the tale, a boy marked as a weapon, a prophecy that demands blood, a final walk into the forest, where Harry offers his life with no shield but love. That moment, that silent march beneath the trees, carries the weight of a whole tradition of heroic sacrifice. It is clean, it is terrible, it is unforgettable. Take Voldemort out of the equation, and that single, blindingly pure act of self-offering can't exist in the same way. Nor can the Battle of Hogwarts as we know it. McGonagall's statues charging, Molly's duel, the wand arcing green and then falling still. So, what rises in its place? This isn't a story about a quieter, safer world where nothing hurts. This is a story about what happens when danger disperses, when instead of one snake-headed tyrant, we have 100 smaller pressures. Ministry reforms that never quite go far enough. Old pureblood families who smile in public and scheme in private. A press that would rather pick apart Harry and Hermione's bond than confront systemic prejudice that never actually died. We're exploring a timeline where the tone shifts from epic tragedy with hopeful notes into complex drama threaded with romance and politics, where Lily and James live, not as sainted portraits in a boy's memory, but as flawed, breathing people who disagree with their son about how radical change should be. where Snape's life is not a single, tortured mission, but a long, humiliating process of learning how to be better when no one needs him to be a spy, where Tom Riddle, never transformed into Voldemort, haunts the story not as a monster, but as the question, how much darkness do we forgive in the name of potential? Most importantly, removing the war gives Harry and Hermione time for late-night debates in a relatively peaceful Hogwarts, for tentative hands touching over arithmancy notes, for arguments that aren't cut short by a killing curse at the window. Their love is not compressed into crisis. It unfolds, hesitates, backtracks, and then surges forward as they try to reform the world together. There is something more profound in watching them choose each other, not because tomorrow they might die, but because tomorrow they have to live with the consequences of their ideals. So what do we prefer? The catharsis of watching a Dark Lord fall, or the quieter satisfaction of seeing a society wrestle with its own reflection when there is no single villain left to blame? Canon gives us the extraordinary release of the final duel, the wand flying, the crowd roaring. This alternate path offers the slow ache of hearings at the Wizengamot, protests on the steps of the Ministry, editorials questioning whether Harry Potter has become too radical or not radical enough. Yet both stories, placed side by side, illuminate the same souls from different angles. In one, Harry is the boy who walks into death and comes back. In the other, he is the man who never has to die for the world, but has to live in it fully, with Hermione at his side, every compromise a fresh scar. In one, Tom Riddle is the terror that must be destroyed. In the other, he is the warning of what happens if we refuse to see the lonely, frightened child before he hardens. And when we hold these narratives together, something worth fighting for emerges. A fuller vision of love, of courage, of how people change when the enemy is outside them, and when the enemy is within. The canon does not shrink beside this what if, it deepens. It becomes the shadow that throws this new light into sharper relief. But if the light is different, the dangers are different too. Because in a world without Voldemort, who gets to decide what dark really means? And what happens when Harry and Hermione's love is the test case the whole wizarding world uses to draw that line? Final reflection, is Tom Riddle redeemed? So what does it actually mean, in this what if, that Tom Riddle never becomes Lord Voldemort? If the world is spared a Dark Lord, is Tom himself spared, or simply sentenced to a different kind of darkness? First, we have to be honest about who this Tom is. He is not a saint miraculously rewritten by love and good mentoring. The boy who learned to control other children at Wool's orphanage does not forget that lesson just because Dumbledore visits more often. The teenager who opened the chamber in canon still has the same brilliance, the same hunger for control, the same cold curiosity about pain. In this timeline, he still manipulates. He still lies. He still hurts people when it serves his designs. The difference is not that he becomes good. The difference is that he is stopped from becoming irredeemably monstrous. This isn't a story about a dark soul suddenly washed clean. This is a story about a soul that never quite manages to shatter. No Horcruxes, no ritual murders, no deliberate tearing of his own humanity into fragments that can never be gathered again. Dumbledore's closer watch, a world less obsessed with blood purity, perhaps even one fragile, inconvenient bond, someone who actually sees Tom and refuses to look away, means he cannot cross that final line without resistance. His humanity is preserved, ragged, and uncomfortable, which means he can be held accountable instead of annihilated. He can be tried, constrained, argued with, forced to listen, instead of simply destroyed. And that fate is emotionally ambiguous in a way Voldemort's death in canon never is. Tom lives. He keeps his face, his name, his place in history, but he does so under limits. Legal, magical, social. Imagine him as a consultant on dangerous magic, bound by oaths, watched by Aurors who studied his essays at Hogwarts. Imagine him attending ministry hearings, where former students, witches and wizards he once tried to mold into extensions of his will, now vote him down, quote him back to himself, use the tools he gave them to deny him power. He has to watch a world shaped by people who chose differently. Lily and James alive, Harry and Hermione leading reforms, Muggleborns stepping into roles he once reserved for the worthy. Is that justice? Is it mercy? Or is it something more profound? A refusal to let him escape the consequences of his choices through martyrdom or monstrosity, because most importantly, this is where the series' deepest theme reasserts itself. It is our choices, far more than our abilities, that show who we truly are. But sometimes the most heroic choice belongs to the people standing nearby, the choice to intervene earlier, to close certain doors, to say no to the experiment, no to the forbidden spell, no to the mythology of the untouchable genius, to keep someone from crossing a line they can never return from, even when they hate you for it in the moment. So is Tom Riddle redeemed, not in the soft, easy sense of universal forgiveness. His story here is less about being forgiven and more about the possibility of change that is partial, painful, and never guaranteed. It is about the responsibility of those around him, Dumbledore, his peers, the next generation, to demand that change, to hold the line, to insist that even the boy who might have been Voldemort is still bound by the same truth as everyone else, that love, law, and connection together are something worth fighting for, and if he resists, if he pushes back, schemes, tests the wards on his own life, that is where the next chapter of this world begins. Recap: the world we built when Voldemort never rose. That is where the next chapter begins. But before we step through that door, we have to look back at the world we've actually built. What if we gather all these threads in our hands for a moment, trace the path from a lonely boy in an orphanage to a man who never becomes a Dark Lord? It starts in Wool's orphanage, where the first divergence is almost invisible from the outside. A caring adult notices the strange incidents, not as proof of evil, but as a frightened child's power misfiring. Instead of fear and punishment, Tom meets boundaries and belief. You are responsible for what you do, but you are not a monster. By the time Dumbledore arrives, he is not facing a feral, coiled presence, but a wary, brilliant boy who has already heard once that his magic is something worth fighting for, not hiding. From there, the pattern holds. Dumbledore does not simply warn and walk away. He mentors, supervises, refuses to be charmed into distance. Slughorn still admires Tom's talent, but when the conversation turns to Horcruxes, he does something extraordinary in its simplicity. He says no, he explains why, he brings Dumbledore in. Curiosity is redirected into academic rigor and ethical debate, into articles, lectures, a career that lets Tom dissect the darkest theories without ever making his first tear in his own soul. No chamber murders, no splintered spirit, no prophecy, because there is no Lord Voldemort for a prophecy to rise against. Around that absence, everyone else's life tilts. Lily and James live, not as war martyrs, but as young parents and impatient activists, clashing with a ministry that still fears change more than injustice. The Marauders grow into complicated men instead of fallen heroes. Sirius fights old pure-blood ideology in the Wizengamot. Remus pushes for werewolf rights from within the system instead of from the shadows. Snape, unmoored from Death Eater oaths and a life debt to Dumbledore, is forced to confront his obsession with Lily and his contempt for James without a war to excuse him. His story is no longer about atonement through espionage. It's about whether he can actually grow. Dumbledore, too, is reconfigured. Without Voldemort as his great external enemy, he has to face the quieter arrogance in his own choices, the temptation to treat people, Tom, Harry, everyone, as pieces on a safer chessboard. And Harry, without the scar as destiny, he is not the boy who lived, but the boy who learns. His bond with Hermione still ignites on that first train, two children in a rattling compartment choosing each other again and again. Patronus practice becomes less about holding back Dementors and more about learning what joy feels like when it isn't just survival. The DA is not an underground army, but a student movement, and in the library, when Hermione finally confesses that her fear isn't death, but losing him to his own recklessness, their love becomes a conscious choice, not a wartime accident. By the time they stand united in the Great Hall, arguing for reform, for accountability, for Tom Riddle's life bound by law and love rather than legend, they are leading together, not because fate demanded it, but because their connection always tended that way. Most importantly, this isn't a story about one grand counter-curse that erases Voldemort. This is a story about 1,000 small decisions to see, to care, to confront, an orphanage matron staying 5 extra minutes, a teacher refusing to look away, friends challenging each other instead of worshipping or condemning, romantic love between Harry and Hermione, parental love from Lily and James, the bruised, imperfect bonds between Marauders, and even between Dumbledore and Tom. They all braid into something more profound than a simple no Dark Lord. Lord. The result is a softer world in some ways, harsher in others. There is less open terror, more insidious prejudice. More people live long enough to make mistakes, to grow, to love. Fewer are shattered before they ever have the chance. The fight is ongoing, but no longer apocalyptic, and that might be the hardest adjustment of all. Without a singular evil to defeat, will this world still find the courage to change itself? That is the question waiting on the other side of Tom Riddle's next choice, and on the other side of Harry and Hermione's next stand. CTA, your turn in the pensive. How would you rewrite Tom's story? That is the question waiting on the other side of Tom Riddle's next choice, and on the other side of Harry and Hermione's next stand. But now the pensieve is in your hands. So, if you had to choose one moment, one fragile turning of the wand that actually kept Tom from becoming Voldemort in this timeline, which would it be? Was it the quiet, almost invisible intervention at Wool's orphanage, when someone finally saw the frightened boy behind the cruelty? Was it Dumbledore's first meeting, not as a distant examiner, but as a mentor who refused to abandon him? Was it Slughorn's lesson, reshaped into a confrontation with mortality, instead of a tutorial in Horcruxes? Or was it Harry and Hermione's final stand in the tournament's aftermath, when they offered him partnership instead of prophecy? Tell us which moment you think mattered most, and why. When you look at Harry and Hermione here, without a Dark Lord always looming over their every choice, how does their love feel to you? Does this bond seem more earned because it grows in the quieter spaces, letters, shared research, late-night arguments over ethics and history instead of constant survival? Or does it feel more fragile, more exposed, because there is no external war to hide behind, no grand destiny to justify how fiercely they hold on to each other? Maybe, for you, this is a story about something more profound, two people choosing to stay together when the world isn't forcing them to be brave every single day. And then there is Tom himself. We're exploring one version where he is watched, guided, and slowly untaught his worship of power. But what if he had fallen in love, truly, with someone who challenged that hunger from the inside? What if another dark figure had risen instead? Someone who never got the scrutiny Tom did, leaving our almost redeemed Riddle to stand with Harry and Hermione against a threat he once might have become? What if Harry had accepted Tom's offer during the tournament, joined him in a controlled alliance to reform the Ministry from within? Would that be courage, or the first step toward a subtler corruption? Would you trust this Tom? Not the myth, not the canon monster, but this awkward, brilliant, tightly coiled young man who has done terrible things and then stopped before the point of no return. Would you work with him under strict supervision, the way Dumbledore and Hermione insist, or would you keep him at arm's length forever? Do you believe people like Tom can change, or only learn to hide their darkness better? Most importantly, what if your version of this timeline looks completely different from mine? Share your rewrites in the comments, the scenes you'd add, the choices you'd reverse, the relationships you'd deepen. This isn't a story about rejecting canon. This is a story about loving it so much that we dare to turn it slightly sideways and see what else might be hiding there. Thank you for stepping into this alternate history with me, for letting Harry, Hermione, and Tom walk a different path together. If you want more emotionally rich, analytically grounded journeys into familiar worlds, remember to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because the next What If might change everything you thought you knew about this world, or the next one.